Close your eyes and imagine time as a spiral, not a straight line. We believe progress always climbs forward, but scattered across history are enigmas that mock this belief. In forgotten stone, in shattered metal, in ruins whispering under moonlight, lie technologies that we cannot recreate, not with our machines, not with our science, not with all our cleverness. These artifacts stand like mirrors, reflecting a hidden intelligence that once walked the earth and left us humbled. Tonight, you will descend into that labyrinth, where the past is not gone, but waiting. Imagine standing at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The desert air is still, the horizon shimmering under an endless sun, and before you rises a structure that seems to defy every calculation you hold about human ability. Stones the size of small cars stacked into a perfect geometry, so precise that the seams between them are almost invisible. You could slide a razor blade between the blocks and feel no resistance. These were not small decorative stones but colossal weights, some more than 70 tons, carried and placed with an accuracy that modern cranes would strain to replicate. The dimensions of the pyramid whisper numbers that echo throughout nature. The ratio of its height to the perimeter aligns astonishingly with pi. Its orientation to the cardinal points is so exact that it deviates by only a fraction of a degree, as if the builders had the tools of modern surveyors. Yet the story we are told is simple. Ordinary workers hauling stones with ropes, ramps and sweat. But the mind resists this explanation, because the geometry feels too exact, too deliberate, too far ahead of its time. What kind of tools measured the stars, and brought them down to Earth? To align this monument with Orion's belt, with the North Pole, with the slow procession of the heavens themselves, requires an intimacy with the cosmos. The pyramid is not simply a tomb, but a frozen equation, a coded monument where mathematics and myth overlap. When you stand at its base, you sense it is not only stone, but language, a form of knowledge made solid, a riddle too heavy to lift. Modern engineers attempt reconstructions. They build ramps, they test pulleys, they bring machines, yet none of these explanations fully recreate what lies before us. It is one thing to imagine stacking stones, it is another to achieve the near-perfect leveling of the base over more than 13 acres, to place blocks so tightly fitted that time itself cannot pry them apart. Water has run off these stones for millennia, sand has scoured them, earthquakes have shaken Egypt's ground, and still the pyramid stands almost as it once did. Our skyscrapers, with all their shining glass, tremble in comparison. The mystery is not only in the building, but in the purpose. Was it a tomb, as Egyptology insists? Yet where is the body? Where are the treasures? Where is the ordinary debris of burial? Instead, we find shafts leading toward stars, chambers resonating with acoustics that behave more like instruments than coffins. The pyramid hums when the wind passes. It sings when sound echoes within. Some researchers suggest it once functioned as a power plant, others as a map of the Earth's latitudes, others as an initiation chamber, where human consciousness was shaped like stone. And in the quiet of the desert night, when you stand and look up at its sharp angles cutting the stars, you feel the weight of an intelligence not lost, but hidden. Was it human genius, stretched to its limits? Was it knowledge borrowed from elsewhere? Or was it simply that ancient people, unburdened by our distractions, had the patience to see the sky, to measure it, and to mirror it in stone? Every answer leads to another question, and the pyramid waits in silence, indifferent to our theories. It does not explain itself. It only exists. Its existence is the paradox. It says you cannot build me again, not as I am. You have machines, you have satellites, you have computer models, and yet I stand alone, unchanged, while your tallest buildings age before they are complete. I am not merely old, I am eternal. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear the rhythm of those who dragged the blocks across sand, but you can also hear something stranger, a hum, a resonance, as if the pyramid itself is alive, waiting for a future when its secrets will be seen not with eyes, but with understanding. Until then, it remains what it has always been, a monument to a forgotten precision, a geometry of stone and silence, an equation without an answer. Picture yourself walking along the crumbling ruins of Rome. The air smells faintly of dust and history, of stone warmed by the Mediterranean sun. 2,000 years have passed, yet the arches still rise, the aqueducts still stand, the harbors still cling to their shape. Roman concrete, opus caementicium, endures in a way our modern concrete can only envy. While our bridges crack within decades, and our seawalls crumble in a century, Roman concrete remains, stronger now than when it was first mixed, How did they make it? What secret did they fold into lime, ash, and stone? Modern scientists take samples. They grind Roman seawall concrete into powders, dissolve it, examine it under microscopes. What they find is almost alchemical. The mixture contains volcanic ash, lime, seawater, and fragments of rock. But inside, within the hardened mass, form crystals called aluminous tobermorite and philipsite. These are not static fillers. They are living minerals that continue to grow, strengthening the material over time. In contact with water, Roman concrete does not weaken. It heals, it resists, it endures. Imagine that for a moment. A building material that grows stronger as centuries pass, not weaker. Our skyscrapers, our highways, our dams, all designed with expiration dates, all destined for repair, collapse, replacement. The Romans, without our machines, made concrete that was not disposable but eternal, and this knowledge slipped away, like a word forgotten in a dream. What kind of society builds for eternity? The Romans poured concrete into harbors, where the sea itself tested their strength. The waves pounded, the salt corroded, storms lashed, yet those harbors remain. Meanwhile, our own reinforced concrete, armed with steel bars, corrodes when touched by salt water, rotting from within until collapse is inevitable. Why is it that we, with satellites and laboratories, cannot match the recipe of men in sandals mixing powders by hand? Some suggest the answer lies in patience. Roman concrete was not quick to set. It took time, weeks, even months to fully cure. Our modern world demands speed. We pour, we harden, we build, we rush. But the Romans poured with a different rhythm, allowing chemistry to weave slowly, crystallizing over time. Their structures were not mere shelters, but monuments designed to outlast generations. Others whisper of intention. Perhaps the Romans saw themselves as eternal. The empire was meant to last forever, and so they built forever into their walls. Every aqueduct arch, every amphitheater curve, was not only architecture but prophecy. Even when their empire crumbled, the concrete remained, mocking time, reminding us of an ambition larger than a single century. Stand inside the Pantheon. Under its vast dome, you look upward and see a hole open to the sky, the oculus, and you realize the concrete above you has held for nearly 2 millennia without reinforcement. No steel rods, no hidden scaffolding, just material so perfectly mixed that it became stronger with age. Our modern domes, thinner, lighter, reinforced with every trick of engineering, will not survive as long. The Pantheon whispers, quietly, you have forgotten something. And so modern science tries to remember. Engineers experiment with volcanic ash again, with seawater, with lime burned not too hot, with aggregates chosen carefully. They rediscover that the Romans practiced what we might call hot mixing, quick lime reacting with water in sudden heat, leaving behind small lime clasts. These clasts, when cracks formed, would dissolve in water and recrystallize, self-healing the concrete. The material was alive in a way ours is not. But replication is not simple. Our concrete industry depends on speed, uniformity, mass production. Roman concrete demands slowness, variation, geological intimacy. Each source of ash, each spring of lime was unique, tied to a landscape, a volcano, a river. To recreate it is not only to recreate a recipe, but a relationship between people and their environment. It was not an industrial formula, it was a ritual. Now, close your eyes, and imagine touching one of those Roman walls. The surface feels rough, but solid, like pressed earth. You press your palm to it, and for a moment you imagine the hands that once built it, mixing powders, carrying buckets, smoothing edges. Those hands are long gone, but the wall remains. The wall carries their memory in silence. And as you trace its lines, you realize this concrete is not just material, it is a message. The message says, you believe you are advanced, but your creations die quickly. We made something that lived longer than our empire. Our knowledge was not only of strength, but of time itself. You hurry, you rush, you collapse. We endured. What would it mean to build like that again? To raise structures that your grandchildren's grandchildren would still see standing, unchanged, eternal. Perhaps it would require us to slow down, to give up the hunger for quick completion, to build with humility toward the centuries. Or perhaps it is too late, and Roman concrete will remain a relic of a different rhythm, a different way of being human. So the ruins stand, arches silhouetted against the sky, harbors half buried in sand, amphitheaters echoing with silence. We walk among them, tourists and dreamers, unaware that the stones beneath our feet hold a secret that our machines cannot repeat. And in the quiet, the walls seem to breathe, not in words, but in endurance, not in explanation, but in survival. Roman concrete remains, a material that defies time, a forgotten spell of stone and ash, a technology we cannot truly replicate, though we try, again and again, to remember. Imagine a blade so sharp it could split a hair drifting in the air. Imagine steel so strong it could cut through lesser swords without dulling, yet flexible enough to bend and spring back without breaking. This was Damascus steel, forged in the fires of forgotten workshops, prized by warriors and feared by enemies, a weapon whispered about as if it were alive. Its watered patterns shimmer like waves frozen into metal, a rippling skin that suggests secrets beneath. For centuries, it defined excellence, and yet today, with all our furnaces and alloys, we cannot fully reproduce it. The mystery of Damascus steel begins in the Middle East around the 3rd century and lasts until about the 18th century, when it suddenly vanishes. These swords, made from a material known as Wootz steel, imported from India and Sri Lanka, carried a reputation that bordered on myth. Crusaders returning from battles in the Holy Land wrote with awe of Muslim swords that could slice cleanly through their European blades. Legends claimed Damascus swords could cut a silk scarf drifting in the wind or pierce the barrel of a rifle. Truth and myth intertwine, but even fragments of reality leave us humbled. Scientists in modern times study surviving blades. They cut tiny samples, analyze them under electron microscopes, and discover something extraordinary. The steel contains carbon nanotubes, tiny cylindrical structures that modern nanotechnology only rediscovered in the 20th century. Within the metal, these nanotubes created strength, flexibility, and resilience far beyond ordinary iron. How could blacksmiths centuries ago, without microscopes, without chemistry, produce materials structured on the nanoscale? The secret seems to lie in the recipe, but also in the ritual. Wootz steel ingots arrived in Damascus as mysterious black cakes. Blacksmiths heated, hammered, cooled, folded, and repeated, following traditions passed through generations. The precise temperatures, the exact timing of cooling, the organic additives mixed in, perhaps leaves, wood, or other impurities, created the microscopic magic. The result was not just steel, but art encoded in metal. Yet when Europeans tried to replicate it, they failed. When modern metallurgists melt the same ingredients, they rarely reproduce the exact microstructure. The recipe is not only chemical but cultural, a lived practice, an embodied rhythm of heat and hand. Somewhere in history that rhythm was broken, the knowledge lost, and the swords became relics, their shimmer mocking our ignorance. Consider how strange this is. We can land machines on Mars, we can split atoms, we can design alloys for jet engines that endure impossible heat. Yet we cannot make Damascus steel in its original form. We come close, approximations, reconstructions, alloys inspired by ancient methods, but none bear the exact same patterns, the same strength, the same whisper of perfection. Now imagine standing in a forge in medieval Damascus. The room glows red with firelight, bellows hiss, sparks fly, a blacksmith leans over the anvil, hammer ringing against steel. Each strike is measured, not random, but remembered. The blade grows slowly, stretched and folded, patterns sleeping inside it. You see the sweat glisten, the fire roar, the metal bend, and rise again. In that rhythm, you feel something more than skill. You feel devotion, almost worship. The sword is not just a weapon, it is a living legacy. The patterns on the blade, called watering, are more than decoration. They are the fingerprints of its structure, the outward sign of an inner perfection. To a warrior, such a sword was not only practical but mystical. It carried honor, identity, destiny. To hold Damascus steel was to hold centuries of refinement, to carry the invisible hands of countless smiths guiding your strike. And so the mystery lingers. Why was it lost? Some say the trade routes collapsed, cutting off the supply of Wootz steel. Others argue the smiths kept their recipes secret, and when their lines ended, the secrets died with them. Others still imagine that changes in the ore itself, mines exhausted, impurities altered, erased the possibility forever. Whatever the reason, by the 18th century, the great blades were gone, and only stories remained. Modern attempts to recreate Damascus steel often reveal something important, that technology is not always about progress. Sometimes it is about presence. The smiths were not rushing. They listened to the metal, They knew its moods, its colors, its whispers as it cooled. They shaped it not as engineers but as artists in dialogue with matter. And perhaps that is why we struggle to replicate them. We have machines, but we have lost intimacy. Close your eyes and imagine holding such a blade. It feels alive in your hand, balanced, light, yet heavy with history. The ripples on its surface catch the light, and you realize they are not only patterns but memories of fires long extinguished, of voices long silent. The sword hums with a paradox. It is stronger than our metals, yet born of forgotten hands. It is sharper than our alloys, yet softer in its mystery. Damascus steel is not only a technology we cannot replicate, it is a reminder that human genius often leaves no manuals, no blueprints, no archives. Sometimes it lives in practice, in ritual, in memory, and when those memories are broken, the knowledge is gone. The blades remain as ghosts of a skill we can glimpse but not hold, shadows of a craft more subtle than we yet understand. And so the swords of Damascus lie in museums and private collections, silent yet alive, their patterns glimmering like frozen water. They whisper of a time when technology was not only material but mystical, when the forge was both workshop and temple, when a sword was not only steel but soul. They remind us that progress is not always forward. Sometimes the past holds secrets we may never reclaim. Imagine the sea swallowing a secret and holding it for 2,000 years. In 1901, divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera discovered a shipwreck, its treasures corroded, its statues green with age. Among the relics was a lump of bronze, so encrusted with coral and stone that it seemed worthless. Yet, when it was cleaned, when the corrosion fell away, gears were revealed, interlocking, intricate, impossible. What emerged was not a weapon, nor a tool of war, but a machine, a computer, from more than a century before the birth of Christ. The Antikythera mechanism. This strange device, now broken into fragments, once held within its bronze teeth the movements of the heavens. By turning a handle, it could predict eclipses, track lunar phases, follow the paths of planets across the sky. 1,000 years before Europe would rediscover clockwork, before Galileo built his telescopes, before Newton mapped the laws of motion, the Antikythera mechanism turned silently, encoding the cosmos in bronze. Its gears, carved with precision so delicate they would not be seen again until the 14th century, speak of a knowledge that should not have existed. Think of the craftsmanship. Dozens of gears, each with tiny evenly spaced teeth, meshing perfectly, transferring motion like whispers passed from one to another. Some wheels were barely a centimeter across, others large enough to bear inscriptions. The maker of this machine did not simply understand metal, but mathematics. Ratios of gear teeth mirrored celestial cycles. A 19-year metonic cycle, an 18-year Syros eclipse cycle, even the complex irregularities of the moon's orbit were accounted for. Whoever built it was not simply an artisan, but an astronomer, a philosopher, a visionary. And yet, this was not a tool for priests alone. The inscriptions suggest it may have been used to teach, to show the cosmos in motion, to make the heavens comprehensible to human eyes. Imagine a scholar turning the crank, pointing to the small bronze dials as they spun, showing students when the next eclipse would darken the sun, when Venus would rise in the morning sky, when the Olympiad, the sacred cycle of games, would occur. It was knowledge condensed, made portable, made touchable, a machine for turning the universe into a story. Modern attempts to recreate the mechanism show the enormity of the mystery. Engineers can replicate it now, with lathes and drills, with precision tools guided by computers. But how did ancient Greeks do it? To cut such tiny teeth with accuracy requires tools and methods we thought they lacked. No other surviving artifact from antiquity shows this level of mechanical sophistication. It appears suddenly in history, fully formed, and then vanishes, leaving only this one corroded example as proof that it existed at all. Why did such knowledge disappear? Why did the Greeks, who built temples of geometry and statues of perfection, not carry this tradition of gears into the future? Some suggest it was a unique genius, a lone inventor whose knowledge died with him. Others point to the fragility of empires, to wars and fires, and the slow erosion of memory. The Romans, practical in their conquests, had little interest in delicate instruments, and so the technology slipped into the dark, waiting for medieval Europe to reinvent it centuries later. Stand in front of the fragments today, displayed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. They do not gleam with perfection. They are broken, rusted, barely recognizable. Yet within their jagged edges you can almost hear the soft clicking of gears turning, carrying the night sky across their bronze faces. You realize that behind the corrosion lies a mind that dared to imagine the cosmos not as myth, but as mechanism. Some whisper that perhaps the Antikythera mechanism was not unique. Perhaps there were others, lost in shipwrecks, melted down for scrap, buried in the ruins of forgotten libraries. Perhaps the Greeks built more machines, more devices, more marvels that never survived. If that is true, then history is not a steady climb of progress, but a fragile dance of memory and forgetting. We may not be the first to glimpse the machinery of the universe. We may only be the latest to rediscover it. Now, close your eyes, and imagine turning the handle yourself. You feel the gears catch, the resistance of bronze against bronze. Slowly the dials rotate, the pointers move, and the date of an eclipse appears on the face. You know, centuries before it comes, that the sky will darken on that day, that the sun will be eaten by shadow. You imagine the awe of those watching, the power of knowledge, disguised as divination. In that moment, you hold the heavens in your hand. And then, when you open your eyes again, you are left with fragments, with corrosion, with questions. The Antikythera mechanism remains an enigma, proof of a brilliance that appeared too soon, or perhaps proof that human history is not as linear as we pretend. It is not simply a machine, it is a paradox, a clock built before clocks, a computer before computers, a secret that waited at the bottom of the sea, to remind us that intelligence is not bound by time. The gears no longer turn, the machine no longer speaks. Yet in its silence, it tells us something profound. Progress is fragile, knowledge can vanish, and the past may still hold technologies that mock our certainty of superiority. The Antikythera mechanism waits in its glass case, whispering not of the future, but of a forgotten past we cannot quite replicate. Imagine the sea at night, black waves lapping against the hull of a wooden ship. Torches flicker along the deck, the air smells of salt and tar, and then suddenly, a roar of flame. Not the ordinary fire of burning wood, but something unnatural, liquid fire, spraying through the darkness, clinging to water, refusing to die. Greek fire, the weapon that made empires tremble. The Byzantines wielded it like a divine secret, and to their enemies it was exactly that, a flame conjured by gods, unstoppable, unquenchable, a terror upon the seas. And to this day, no one truly knows how it was made. Greek fire was first recorded in the 7th century, when the Byzantine Empire faced invasion from Arab fleets. Constantinople was vulnerable, surrounded by hostile waters, its survival dependent on holding the seas. Into this desperate moment came a man named Lycurgus, an engineer from Syria, who offered a formula for a weapon unlike any other. With his invention, Byzantine ships turned the tide of battle. They unleashed jets of burning liquid, through siphons mounted on their prows, spewing fire that clung to enemy vessels, burning sails, splintering wood, searing flesh. The attackers fled, leaving behind charred wreckage and stories of a fire that could not be fought. What made it terrifying was not only its destructive power, but its defiance of nature. Fire should die on water, but Greek fire thrived on it, burning even as waves crashed down. Sailors threw sand, water, even vinegar, and still the flames clung. To those who saw it, it was supernatural, a holy weapon guarded by angels. To the Byzantines, it was not merely a military tool, but a symbol of divine favor, proof that God protected their empire with flame. The formula was guarded with obsession. Only a handful of imperial chemists and engineers knew it. Sworn to secrecy, their knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Like priesthood, to reveal the recipe was treason punishable by death. For centuries, this secrecy held. Enemy empires tried to steal it, bribing, torturing, infiltrating. None succeeded. Greek fire remained a Byzantine monopoly, the terror of the Mediterranean. And then, it vanished. By the 13th century, the formula was gone. The empire weakened, the chain of secrecy broken, and with it the knowledge dissolved. Modern scientists, armed with chemistry and laboratories, have tried to reconstruct it. Some propose it was based on crude oil or naphtha, substances available in the ancient world. Others suggest quicklime, sulfur, resin, or combinations that would ignite on contact with water. Yet every attempt remains an approximation. None burns exactly as the chronicles describe. None clings to the sea with the same fury. Imagine standing on the deck of a Byzantine drawman, the warship that carried these weapons. The bronze siphon mounted at the prow hisses, its dragon-shaped head belching liquid fire. You feel the deck shudder as pressure builds in the pumps, then the roar as the substance erupts, a stream of fire arching into the night. Across the water, enemy ships scramble in panic, buckets of water splash uselessly, men leap overboard, only to find the sea itself burning. The smell of pitch and sulfur fills your lungs, and the horizon glows red. It is not merely battle, it is apocalypse. What makes Greek fire more haunting than other lost technologies is the way it embodies human fear. Fire is the oldest weapon, but water was always its end. Here the end itself was defeated. To fight the sea and win is to command the elements, to mock the order of nature. That is why it was remembered, not only as invention, but as sorcery. Even enemies who doubted divine origins still spoke of it with awe, conceding its uncanny strength. And yet, its very secrecy doomed it, because it was never written plainly, never shared widely. It could not survive the crumbling of the empire. When Constantinople fell centuries later, Greek fire had already faded, its recipe lost in ashes and ruins. A weapon that once ruled the seas was gone, leaving behind only fragments of descriptions, vague recipes in chronicles, guesses that echo like half-remembered dreams. The paradox is sharp. By hiding their greatest technology, the Byzantines ensured it could not be stolen, but they also ensured it could be forgotten. It was preserved so well that it slipped out of history altogether. What remains is not the weapon itself, but the ghost of its terror, the fear it burned into memory. Now, close your eyes and imagine the silence after the battle. The sea is still, but its surface glimmers with oily flame, patches of fire drifting like islands across the waves. The wreckage of ships floats charred and smoking. Survivors cling to debris, coughing, blinded, whispering prayers. And on the Byzantine decks, sailors stare at the siphons, wondering themselves what they have unleashed. They are only men, yet they hold a weapon that feels more like judgment than invention. Today, Greek fire is a phrase we use for anything unstoppable, anything uncontrollable. Yet the truth is simpler and stranger. It was real, it was human, and we cannot recreate it. In that absence, it becomes almost mythic. Proof that even with science in our hands, mystery still burns. The formula is gone, but the memory remains. A fire we cannot extinguish, a secret we cannot reignite, a technology forever lost to the sea. Imagine arriving by ship to the island of Rhodes in the 3rd century BCE. The Aegean sun glitters off the waves, the sails crack in the wind, and there before you rises a vision so staggering that sailors fall silent, forgetting to breathe. A statue of bronze and iron, taller than any you have ever seen, gleaming like fire in the morning light. The Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a monument so massive, so audacious, that even today with skyscrapers and cranes, we cannot fully comprehend how it was built, or why. The Colossus was erected around 280 BCE to celebrate the island's victory over a siege by Demetrius Poliorcetes, a warlord whose armies had failed to conquer Rhodes. To honor their survival and their sun god, Helios, the Rhodians chose not simply to build a temple, nor an altar, but a statue taller than any that had ever existed. Estimates suggest it stood between 100 and 110 feet tall, roughly the height of the Statue of Liberty without her pedestal. Constructed of bronze plates over an iron framework, it depicted Helios, the sun god, crowned in rays, standing guard over the harbor. For nearly 60 years it cast its shadow over the sea, before an earthquake toppled it in 226 BCE. But the mystery is not in its fall, it is in its rise. How did the Rhodians, with primitive cranes and pulleys, lift hundreds of tons of bronze and iron into place? Ancient descriptions tell us little. No detailed construction plans survive, yet the logistics stagger the mind. To create such a statue, artisans would have needed to cast bronze in sections, transport them, hoist them with scaffolding or earth ramps, and fuse them seamlessly. Each plate had to be hammered and riveted, each joint secured, each part balanced against collapse. Some legends claim the Colossus straddled the harbor entrance, ships passing between its legs. While modern historians doubt this image, the engineering would have been near impossible. The idea itself shows how myth fused with reality. The statue was so beyond comprehension that people imagined it as even larger, even more impossible. What is certain is that it dominated the skyline, visible to sailors for miles, a beacon of resilience and divine protection. The technology of hollow-cast bronze was known to the Greeks, but never on this scale. Smaller statues had been made with similar methods, but nothing approached this magnitude. Even the Statue of Liberty, built more than 2,000 years later, required industrial machinery, steam-powered cranes, and an entire nation's effort. The Rhodians had none of this. They had only livers, pulleys, ropes, and human determination. To think of hundreds of workers coordinating to lift massive bronze sheets into position, without collapse, without modern safety, is to realize we are staring into a forgotten genius of practical engineering. And then, there is the framework itself. Inside the statue was an iron skeleton, anchored by stone supports, distributing the weight evenly. This combination of stone, iron, and bronze was advanced, anticipating structural principles we still use today. But again, the plans are lost, the details erased. What we know comes only from fragments of description, and from the awe of those who saw it. The Colossus is less a fact than a memory, a dream half buried in ruins. When it fell, the story did not end. For nearly 1,000 years the ruins lay where they crashed, enormous fragments of bronze scattered across the ground. Travelers wrote of fingers thicker than a man's body, of limbs lying like fallen trees, of hollow chambers where birds nested. People journeyed from distant lands just to stand among the shattered pieces, as if even broken, the Colossus radiated power. Eventually invaders carried away the fragments, melted them down, and the wonder was gone, leaving behind only stories and silence. And so, the Colossus stands in imagination only. Artists draw it, filmmakers animate it, dreamers resurrect it, but the true form is lost. What remains is the paradox. How could people of limited means on a small island create something so monumental that even its ruins dwarfed memory? Was it determination alone, or did they inherit knowledge of materials and balance that we do not fully grasp? Now, close your eyes, and imagine the moment it was complete. The scaffolds torn away, the ropes lowered, the workers standing back as the sun rose over the sea. Bronze caught the first light, and the god of the sun himself seemed to step onto the earth. The people of Rhodes must have gasped, must have felt both pride and humility. Pride that they had built it, humility that it towered over them, larger than life, larger than memory. It was more than a statue. It was defiance in metal, a declaration that they had survived and would not be forgotten. Today the Colossus is gone, and yet it endures in imagination. Every giant statue we build, from Liberty to Rio's Christ the Redeemer, echoes that ancient ambition, and still with our cranes and machines, we hesitate to match what Rhodes dared, perhaps because it was not only about technology, it was about belief. The Colossus rose not simply from bronze, but from conviction, and conviction, like technology, is something we sometimes lose. The sea laps quietly now where Helios once stood. Ships pass, unaware that a wonder once towered there. But if you listen, if you close your eyes to the silence, you can almost hear the groan of ropes, the clang of bronze, the cheer of voices. You can almost see sunlight flashing off a god of metal. Too immense for time to hold. The Colossus is gone, but its shadow still stretches across history, a monument to an ambition we cannot quite replicate. Picture a clay jar, unremarkable at first glance. It is small, the kind of object you might find forgotten in an attic, or lying in a dusty corner of a ruin. Inside, however, rests a mystery that has troubled historians and scientists for nearly a century. The jar contains a copper cylinder, a rod of iron, and traces of acidic residue, found near Baghdad in the 1930s. These artifacts, now called the Baghdad batteries, hint at the possibility that ancient people may have harnessed electricity long before Benjamin Franklin flew his kite. Yet no one truly knows what these jars were for. The debate begins with their structure. Each artifact consists of a clay pot, about 6 inches tall. Within, a rolled sheet of copper formed a cylinder, capped at the bottom, while an iron rod extended down the center. Between the rod and the cylinder was an insulating layer, often bitumen. When reconstructed and filled with vinegar, or another acidic solution, the jar produces a small but measurable electrical current, like a primitive galvanic cell. In essence, a battery. If this was intentional, it changes history. The Baghdad batteries could date back nearly 2,000 years to the Parthian or Sasanian empires. At a time when Europe knew little of such forces, these jars might have been quietly generating electricity in the Middle East. But the question remains, for what purpose? Some theorists suggest electroplating. Perhaps artisans dipped jewelry or statues into these jars, coating them with thin layers of gold or silver, achieving a brilliance otherwise impossible. Others argue they may have been used in medicine, delivering mild shocks for therapeutic purposes. Still others imagine they served as religious tools, providing small sparks to inspire awe, proof of divine power in the hands of priests. Each theory fascinates, but none has been proven. Skeptics, however, raise objections. They argue that the artifacts could have been simple storage vessels, their resemblance to batteries coincidental. The iron and copper could have served non-electrical purposes, and the acidic residues might come from ordinary contents like wine or pickled food. They remind us that no wires, no lamps, no other electrical devices were found alongside them. A battery without something to power seems incomplete. Was it truly electricity, or are we projecting modern imagination onto ancient artifacts? Yet the mystery deepens when we remember that ancient cultures often combined science and ritual. The Parthians and Sasanians built complex aqueducts, engineered irrigation systems, and mastered metallurgy. It is not impossible that they experimented with forces we do not credit them for. Imagine a priest dipping his hand into a jar, feeling the faint sting of current, and declaring it divine. Imagine a craftsman watching dull bronze jewelry emerge from a bath gleaming like gold. The knowledge may not have been widespread, but perhaps it was real, guarded, and used for purposes we can only guess. Close your eyes, and picture one of these jars in a darkened temple. The air smells of incense. Torches flicker against stone walls. A priest holds the jar aloft, inserts an iron rod, and a faint spark leaps. The gathered crowd gasps, convinced they are in the presence of divine fire. For them, it is not science, but miracle. For us, it is a reminder that technology is often born not in laboratories but in rituals, half hidden beneath layers of belief. The paradox lies not only in the jars themselves, but in our reaction to them. We want certainty. Were they batteries or not? Yet history rarely gives us clean answers. Perhaps they were, perhaps they weren't. Perhaps the electricity was discovered, then forgotten, then rediscovered centuries later. Human knowledge is not a straight road. It is a spiral, looping, losing, returning. The Baghdad batteries may be evidence of one of those loops. Scientists have replicated them in modern experiments. They produce between 0.5 and 1 volt, enough to plate small objects in thin metal. The effect is real, but is replication proof of intention, or are we imposing our logic on objects whose true purposes are lost? The jars themselves cannot speak. They remain silent, fragments of clay holding within them the echo of a question that has no final answer. What makes the Baghdad batteries so hypnotic is not just the possibility of ancient electricity, it is the reminder of how fragile knowledge is. A technique may be discovered by accident, used briefly, then abandoned, leaving only clues that puzzle future generations. Our own technologies, if abandoned, would confuse those who came after us. Imagine future archaeologists finding a smartphone without satellites, a power plant without fuel. Would they see genius or nonsense? Would they reconstruct our intentions correctly, or invent myths around us? And so the jars sit in museums, small and humble, yet carrying the weight of an enormous debate. They whisper of lost possibilities, of a world where ancient hands may have touched forces we think of as modern. They also whisper of our own arrogance, of how easily we dismiss what we cannot fit into our timelines. Now, imagine yourself holding one. The clay feels rough against your fingers. Inside, metal and bitumen, silent but suggestive. You tilt it, hearing the faint rattle. Is it simply a vessel, or is it a secret, waiting for someone to fill it with liquid and feel the spark again? The jar will not answer. It leaves you suspended between awe and doubt, between certainty and imagination. That is its power. Not only what it may have done, but how it forces us to wonder. The Baghdad batteries remain a paradox, perched on the border of science and myth. Perhaps they carried a current once, flickering briefly across history before vanishing. Perhaps they never did, and the current is only in our imagination. Either way, they remind us that history is not only what we know, but what we cannot replicate. A small jar, a spark, a silence, that is enough to ignite the mind. In a quiet gallery of the British Museum sits a cup that seems alive. At first glance, it is a delicate cage cup, Roman in origin, crafted of glass with intricate panels, showing the story of King Lycurgus entangled by vines. But when light strikes it, something extraordinary happens. In normal light, the cup glows a deep green, shine light from behind, and it suddenly shifts to a vivid blood red. The transformation is so startling, so otherworldly, that even today, it feels like magic. This is the Lycurgus Cup, a 4th century artifact that contains a secret we cannot easily replicate, ancient nanotechnology. The phenomenon is called dichroism, the ability of a material to change color depending on how light passes through it. Modern scientists studying the cup discovered that Roman craftsmen somehow embedded tiny particles of gold and silver, nanoparticles, smaller than a wavelength of visible light, into the glass. The distribution and size of these particles manipulate light in ways our optics labs only rediscovered in the 20th century. When reflected, the glass scatters green. When transmitted, it filters to red. The result is a cup that shifts like a living jewel, its colors flickering as if lit from within. Imagine being a Roman guest at a banquet where this cup was displayed. Oil lamps flicker, shadows stretch, and when the host lifts the vessel, it changes color before your eyes. The myth of Lycurgus, punished for defying Dionysus, becomes more than a story carved in glass. It becomes a performance of transformation. Green to red, day to blood, myth to reality. For ancient viewers, it must have seemed enchanted, a vessel imbued with divine power. For us, it reveals an understanding of materials far ahead of its time. The mystery lies in how it was made. Roman glassmakers did not have electron microscopes. They did not know words like nanoparticles or plasmon resonance. Yet, by grinding gold and silver to impossibly fine powders and mixing them with molten glass, they created a material with optical properties still difficult to reproduce consistently. Too much gold, and the glass is opaque. Too little, and the effect vanishes. The balance required is so precise that even modern attempts struggle to match the vivid shift of the Lycurgus cup. Some scientists suggest that the craftsmen may not have understood the physics, but rather discovered the effect through experiment and guarded the recipe. Like alchemists, they worked by intuition, guided by color and form, repeating rituals that eventually created wonders. Others wonder whether the cup we see is the product of chance, a happy accident of impurities and fire. But chance alone seems too weak to explain such controlled beauty. The patterns of nanoparticles are uniform, deliberate. The Romans knew what they were doing, even if they lacked our vocabulary. Close your eyes and imagine the workshop. A furnace roars, molten glass glows, artisans stir with iron rods. A pinch of powder, ground gold, ground silver, is thrown into the mix. The glass swirls, shimmering with flecks too small to see. Hours later, cooled and shaped, the vessel emerges, unassuming until light awakens it. In that moment, the artisans must have known they had made something alive, something that would outlast their empire. The paradox of the Lycurgus cup is that it embodies both fragility and permanence. It is made of glass, a material easily shattered, yet its secret lies in structures so small that time cannot erase them. 2 millennia have passed, empires fallen, libraries burned, and still the nanoparticles within remain intact, shifting colors with every beam of light. The cup is both delicate and eternal, a paradox in material form. Some researchers speculate that cups like this were not unique. Other Roman dichroic glass fragments exist, though none as complete or spectacular as the Lycurgus cup. This suggests that the technique may have been more widespread, perhaps even an industry of luxury glass known to the elite. But if so, the knowledge was lost. By the Middle Ages, glassmakers no longer produced such effects. It would not return until scientists experimenting with colloidal gold in the 17th century stumbled upon similar phenomena. The cup is not merely science. It is art made science, myth made material. Its panels show Lycurgus punished by Dionysus, trapped by vines, transformed into a warning against hubris, and the glass itself embodies that warning. It shows us how easily human mastery can be forgotten, how easily brilliance can slip into legend. The Romans touched nanotechnology without naming it, and then it was gone, leaving us with fragments of knowledge that seem almost impossible. Now imagine holding the cup yourself. In your hands, it glows green, calm and cool, like forest shadows. Then you tilt it, light passing through, and suddenly it burns red, like blood, like sacrifice, like a god's wrath. You realize you are not only holding glass, but history condensed, light captured and bent by hands long gone. The cup does not need to explain itself. It only needs to change, and in that change, it reveals the truth. The past was never as simple as we believe. The Lycurgus cup reminds us that technology is not linear. It is a fire passed from hand to hand, sometimes blazing, sometimes extinguished. The Romans held that fire in glass, creating a marvel that still outshines our certainty. Today, it sits behind glass of another kind, a museum case, safe but silent. Yet when the light hits just right, when green becomes red, it still feels alive, still feels enchanted. Perhaps that is the final secret. The cup was never meant only to hold wine. It was meant to hold wonder, and wonder, once poured, never truly empties. High above the dry Peruvian desert, the ground becomes a canvas. At first, walking across the plain, you see nothing unusual, just rocks, sand, and endless dust. But climb into the sky, and the earth itself reveals pictures drawn on a scale too massive for human eyes alone. A hummingbird with wings spread wide, a spider stretching its legs, a monkey curling its spiral tail, straight lines stretching for miles like cosmic runways. These are the Nazca lines, geoglyphs carved into the desert nearly 2,000 years ago, so vast that they can only be fully appreciated from above. Their geometry, precision, and purpose remain one of the world's great mysteries. The Nazca people, who lived between 200 BCE and 600 CE, etched these figures by removing the reddish-brown surface stones, exposing lighter-colored earth beneath. With simple tools and careful planning, they created designs that still defy comprehension. Some figures stretch more than 1,000 feet across. Lines run straight for over 10 miles without wavering, as though drawn with rulers longer than any human arm. Even today, with GPS and aerial mapping, maintaining such precision across such distances would be challenging. For the Nazca, without airplanes or satellites, it seems almost impossible. The paradox is not only in their scale, but in their visibility. From the ground, the figures are nearly invisible, indistinct patterns etched into flat desert. Only from above do the shapes emerge clearly, yet the Nazca could not fly. Balloons or towers are sometimes suggested, but evidence is scarce. So how did they design images that could only be seen in their entirety from the sky? Did they pace them out with ropes and stakes, constructing on faith, or did they have a way of seeing the earth that we no longer understand? Modern experiments suggest it is possible to create large-scale geoglyphs with careful planning, ropes and grids. Archaeologists have replicated smaller figures using simple surveying techniques, showing that it was not impossible. Yet the effort required is staggering. Why devote so much energy to lines that no one on the ground could fully see? Why stretch them across miles of desert, when smaller images would have been easier? The mystery of purpose remains. Theories abound. Some suggest the lines were ritual paths, walked by priests during ceremonies, their shapes known not by sight, but by memory. Others propose astronomical functions, alignments with solstices and star risings, maps of the heavens drawn upon the earth. Still others believe they were offerings to gods, the lines designed for sky deities who could see them from above, messages carved for eyes not human but divine. More speculative voices imagine alien visitors, the lines as landing strips or beacons, though such theories live more in popular imagination than scholarship. Close your eyes, and imagine walking the desert centuries ago. The sun beats down, the air is dry, silence presses against your ears. A group of figures move slowly across the plain, dragging stones, clearing paths, marking lines. They do not look up, for there is nothing above them but endless sky. Yet they walk as if guided by something larger. Perhaps they believe the gods are watching, that each step is prayer, that the lines will be seen by spirits who fly above. To them, visibility is not for human eyes. It is for divine perception. And yet, the geometry is undeniable. Some figures align with astronomical events. Certain lines point directly to the solstice sun, or to bright stars rising over the horizon. Others stretch toward mountains or water sources, suggesting connections between earth and sky, survival and divinity. The desert itself becomes a sacred map, a dialogue between human hands and cosmic order. To walk these lines may have been to enter that dialogue, to embody myth and astronomy at once. What makes the Nazca lines even more haunting is their endurance. The desert is so dry, so windless, that the geoglyphs remain almost untouched after centuries. The earth preserves them, as though guarding a message no one can fully read. Today, from airplanes, satellites and drones, we trace them easily, but in that clarity lies deeper mystery. We see the forms, the hummingbird, the spider, the monkey, but we do not see the meaning. The Nazca left no written explanation. The lines are language without translation, symbols without key. The paradox grows. We can measure the lines, map them, replicate them, but purpose eludes us. Were they prayers, calendars, guides for spirits of the dead, or something we cannot even imagine, a worldview too alien for us to grasp? Their geometry is precise, their scale immense, their endurance miraculous, and yet they remain silent, their meaning as dry as the desert air, resisting interpretation. Now picture flying over them at dawn. The desert glows gold beneath you. shadows stretching long. Suddenly below, a giant hummingbird spreads across the sand, wings outstretched as if in flight. Further on, a spider sprawls across the earth, its legs reaching into infinity. Then a monkey, its tail curling in a perfect spiral. For a moment, you feel the awe of seeing what the Nazca themselves may never have seen. The earth transformed into a gallery too large for human eyes. The Nazca lines remind us that technology is not only about machines and tools. Sometimes it is about vision, about scale, about the willingness to inscribe meaning on a canvas larger than life itself. The Nazca achieved something that endures not because of steel or electricity, but because of imagination and devotion. They turned a desert into a mirror of belief, geometry into ritual, earth into myth. And so the lines remain, carved into silence, glowing under the sun, seen clearly only from above. We can measure them, but we cannot fully replicate the vision behind them. They are not only ancient technology, but ancient imagination made permanent, a paradox of geometry that humbles even our satellites. The desert whispers still. You can see the lines, but you may never truly read them. High in the Andes, overlooking the ancient city of Cusco, lies a fortress of stone unlike any other. Sacsayhuamán, a name that feels like both a place and a riddle, rises with walls so massive, so precise, that even today they leave engineers baffled. Giant stones, some weighing over 100 tons, interlock with each other in patterns so exact that a blade of grass cannot slip between them. No mortar binds them, no cement holds them, yet they have stood for centuries, enduring earthquakes that shattered colonial buildings nearby. They remain, immovable, mocking both time and our assumptions about ancient skill. The first thing you notice is the scale. Blocks taller than a person loom in jagged rows, their edges cut to match their neighbors with uncanny accuracy. Each stone is unique, yet together they fit as though poured into place. The angles are not simple rectangles but complex polygons, some with as many as 12 sides, each slotting against others like a puzzle solved in stone. How did the Inca move them, cut them, shape them, and place them so perfectly without iron tools or wheels? The question echoes through every crevice, unanswered. Modern theories attempt explanations. Some suggest the stones were dragged with ropes and manpower, hauled up ramps carved into the hillsides. Others propose that smaller stones were chipped slowly, fitting by trial and error until the pieces locked. But standing before them, the theories feel inadequate. The surfaces are so smooth, the joints so tight, the angles so intricate, that randomness seems impossible. It feels less like trial and error, and more like knowledge, a forgotten system of engineering. Then there is the question of resilience. Earthquakes shake the Andes with brutal force, toppling buildings and churches. Yet Sacsayhuamán's walls endure. Their interlocking stones absorb shock, shifting slightly and then settling back, refusing collapse. In this way, the Inca achieved a kind of seismic resistance we struggle to match with steel and concrete. The walls are both rigid and flexible, a paradox of permanence and adaptability. The technology seems more advanced than the simple tools credited to the builders. Close your eyes and imagine the construction. Hundreds of workers carve into mountain quarries, chiseling with stone hammers, applying fire and water to crack boulders. They drag massive blocks with ropes, singing chants to coordinate their movements, hauling inch by inch up steep slopes. At the site, master builders test the fit, shaving edges until one massive stone locks into the next, like teeth of a giant gear. It is exhausting, impossible work, yet somehow it is done, repeated, until walls rise as though the earth itself has grown into fortification. Spanish chroniclers who arrived in the 16th century wrote with awe of Sacsayhuamán, describing stones as large as a house. They asked the Inca how such marvels were made. The answers were evasive, sometimes mythical. The stones were softened by plants, they said, made malleable like clay then hardened again. Modern researchers dismiss this as legend, yet the myth persists, for it speaks to a deeper truth, that the techniques used were so alien to European understanding that only magic seemed plausible. And perhaps that is the real power of Sacsayhuamán. It blurs the line between engineering and enchantment. To stand in its shadow is to feel dwarfed not only by stone but by imagination. The builders did not merely construct walls, they sculpted mountains, fusing nature and architecture into something inseparable. The stones are not imposed upon the earth, but grown out of it, as if the Andes themselves chose to rise into form. The paradox is sharpened by the fact that we cannot fully replicate the method today. Yes, we can cut stone with diamond tools, lift with cranes, transport with trucks, but to replicate the same precision, on the same scale, without mortar, in high mountain terrain, with only the tools the Inca are said to have possessed, that remains beyond us. We can simulate it in theory, but the lived practice, the embodied knowledge, has vanished. The walls remain as mute testimony to a skill we cannot reclaim. And then there is meaning. Why build such walls? Was Sacsayhuamán a fortress, a ceremonial center, a sacred space? The zigzag pattern of its walls suggests both defense and symbolism. Some say it represented the teeth of a puma, Cusco itself imagined as a great animal. Others see astronomical alignments, a dialogue between stone and sky. Whatever the case, the walls were not merely functional, they were statements, carved into eternity. Now imagine standing within the fortress at dusk. The Andes glow orange, shadows stretching long. The stones loom cool to the touch, vast and unyielding. You run your hand along a seam where two blocks meet, expecting a gap but finding none. The stones feel alive, as though they breathe together, locked in eternal embrace. Above you, condors wheel in silence, and for a moment you sense what the builders must have known, that to build such walls is not simply to shape stone, but to shape memory. Sacsayhuamán remains. While empires rise and fall, Spanish churches crumble, modern cities quake, yet the fortress stands, immovable and inscrutable. It is not only an ancient technology we cannot replicate, it is a philosophy in stone. Strength without rigidity, precision without machinery, endurance without explanation. It humbles us, reminding us that progress is not always forward, that the past sometimes whispers of skills more enduring than our own. The walls stretch on, unbroken, heavy as mountains, silent as gods. They do not explain themselves. They do not need to. They are their own explanation. A paradox of human hands shaping the earth in ways we no longer understand. In the year 132 CE, during the reign of the Han dynasty, a man named Zhang Heng built a vessel that seemed to contain the breath of the earth itself. It was called a Haofeng Daidong Yi, a seismoscope, an earthquake detector. Picture a great bronze urn, taller than a man, polished until it gleamed like liquid sunlight. Around its sides were 8 dragons, each holding a bronze ball in its mouth. Beneath each dragon crouched a toad with its jaws open, waiting. To look at it was to see a piece of art, a myth frozen in metal. But to watch it work was to witness something that feels impossible even today. When an earthquake occurred, even far away, one dragon would open its mouth and drop its ball into the waiting toad below with a clang. The sound rang out like a bell, announcing the direction of the quake. Not just the occurrence, but the direction, hundreds of miles distant, beyond what human senses could perceive. In one famous account, the device released a ball, even though no one nearby felt any shaking. Weeks later, a messenger arrived from the west, reporting an earthquake in a distant province. Zhang Heng's urn had spoken first. The technology behind it remains a mystery. How could a device with no electronics, no sensors as we know them, detect tremors from so far away? Some modern engineers suggest it used an internal pendulum, delicately balanced, which would swing when vibrations traveled through the earth. The swing would trigger one dragon's mechanism, releasing a ball in that direction. Others think it may have relied on subtle resonance, amplifying tiny movements into mechanical action. Yet the exact design is lost. No working replica has ever captured the precision described in ancient texts. Close your eyes and imagine standing in a Han Dynasty court. Courtiers in silk robes, murmuring in astonishment as the bronze ball clatters into the toad's mouth. Outside, the air is calm, the ground steady, yet the urn has spoken, predicting a tremor no one feels. To the people of that time, it must have seemed divine, as if Zhang Heng had captured the voice of heaven and placed it in bronze. To us, it feels like science ahead of its age, glimpsed once and then lost. The paradox is sharp. Earthquake detection is still a complex science today, requiring seismographs, sensors and data networks across the globe. We can measure magnitude and model waves, but even now, predicting earthquakes remains nearly impossible. And yet, in the 2nd century, a single device built by human hands claimed to detect distant quakes with accuracy. Was it real? Was it legend magnified by time? Or was Zhang Heng's mastery of mechanics simply beyond what we credit to his age? Zhang Heng himself was no ordinary figure. He was an astronomer, mathematician, inventor, and poet, a polymath, whose mind spanned both heavens and earth. He charted constellations, created celestial globes, and wrote verses about the harmony of nature. For him, the seismoscope was not merely practical but philosophical. To build it was to embody the belief that the universe spoke through patterns, that even the chaos of earthquakes followed laws that could be read if one had the right tool. His urn was both machine and metaphor, a reminder that even in disaster, order might be found. The tragedy is that his invention did not endure. Later dynasties mentioned it, admired it, but failed to preserve its secrets. Replicas were attempted, none successful. By the time European scientists began building their own seismographs centuries later, Zhang Heng's device was already legend, its inner workings buried by time. Today, only written accounts and artistic reconstructions survive, leaving us with questions that gnaw. Imagine the silence of the urn in a palace hall. For weeks it does nothing, standing tall and still, its dragons gleaming, its toads patient. Then one day the silence breaks, a clang sharp and metallic echoing through the chamber. Courtiers rush forward, pointing to the direction indicated. Soldiers are dispatched westward. Days later the news arrives. Villages destroyed, mountains shaken. The urn was right. The device is no longer decoration but oracle, both feared and revered. What makes this story hypnotic is not simply the invention itself, but what it represents about memory. Knowledge is not guaranteed to survive. Zhang Heng's seismoscope shows us that even breakthroughs that feel miraculous can vanish, leaving only whispers behind. Our own sciences, too, may one day be forgotten, our machines turned into puzzles for future archaeologists. The urn reminds us that history is not a straight ascent of progress, but a cycle of discovery and forgetting, of brilliance shining briefly before fading. Touch the urn in your imagination. Feel the smooth bronze under your fingertips, the cool weight of dragons poised to release their secrets. You do not know what lies inside. Springs, pendulums, some mechanism lost to time. The urn remains closed, as silent in its mystery as it is loud in its function. You want to open it, to understand, but perhaps the real power lies not in explanation but in wonder. The Chinese Quake detector is not only an ancient machine, it is a reminder that technology does not need wires or electricity to astonish. It is proof that human imagination has always sought to hear the whispers of the earth. And though we cannot replicate it perfectly, we stand in its shadow, listening, hoping to catch the same echo Zhang Heng once heard, the voice of the world itself, trembling in bronze. Imagine a Viking warrior on the battlefield, his longship anchored nearby, the sky dark with smoke. In his hand gleams not just a weapon, but a marvel of metallurgy centuries ahead of its time. The blade is sharp, strong and flexible, bearing a name inlaid along its length, plus Ulfberht plus T. To enemies, it is terror. To allies, it is prestige. To historians, it is a paradox. These Ulfberht swords, forged between the 9th and 11th centuries, contained steel so pure that Europe would not replicate it again until the Industrial Revolution, nearly 800 years later. Ordinary swords of the Viking Age were made with bloomery iron, riddled with impurities, brittle under stress. They chipped, bent, and broke. But Ulfberht swords were different. Their steel contained carbon in precisely balanced amounts, granting hardness and sharpness without brittleness. Even more astonishing, the steel was almost free of slag, the impurities that plagued other European weapons. This quality is called crucible steel, requiring temperatures of around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond what most medieval forges could achieve. How did Viking smiths, in a world of bellows and charcoal fires, obtain such material? For centuries, scholars believed Europe lacked the technology to produce crucible steel. It was thought to be the domain of India and Persia, where Wootz steel had been perfected and traded along the Silk Road. Indeed, many now believe Ulfberht swords were forged using imported crucible steel ingots, acquired through long-distance trade. But importing material is one thing, forging it into legendary blades is another. The smiths who bore the Ulfberht name turned that rare material into weapons so fine that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate their craftsmanship. Close your eyes and picture the forge. Heat blazes, sparks fly, and a blacksmith hammers with deliberate rhythm. The ingot glows white, each strike folding carbon evenly, expelling weakness, coaxing purity from fire. Slowly the blade takes shape, long, slender, balanced. The smith inlays the name Ulfberht with iron wire, branding the sword with a mark of both identity and power. When it cools, polished to gleam, it is more than metal, it is authority forged in fire. Yet not all swords with the name were equal. Some appear to be counterfeits, ordinary steel with the Ulfberht inscription added, as if the brand itself carried magic. This suggests that Ulfberht was not merely a maker but a lineage, a tradition, perhaps even a guild of swordsmiths whose reputation became legend. To own a true Ulfberht was to wield a weapon beyond compare, one that could cleave through chainmail and still remain keen. In battle, such an advantage could decide life or death. Modern analysis with X-ray fluorescence and electron microscopes confirms the mystery. The steel in authentic Ulfberht blades has a uniform carbon content, no slag, and incredible purity. Such steel would not become common in Europe until the 18th century, with industrial crucibles and controlled furnaces. The Vikings, somehow, had it 8 centuries earlier. Did they learn the secrets of crucible steel from Eastern traders? Did they experiment with their own high-heat furnaces lost to time? Or were they simply skilled enough to take imported woods and forge it into something even finer? The answers remain buried in history. The paradox grows when you consider the Vikings' world. They were seafarers, raiders, explorers, not known for great cities or monumental architecture. Yet in metallurgy, they leapt centuries ahead. The Ulfberht sword embodies this contradiction. A people seen as barbaric wielding technology that surpassed their so-called civilized contemporaries. The sword becomes a riddle, asking us to reconsider what we think we know about progress and who holds knowledge. Imagine being struck by such a blade. The enemy sword shatters against yours, sparks flying, your weapon unscathed. The edge bites cleanly, sliding through armor with terrifying ease. To the warrior, this is not science. It is magic, divine favor, destiny in steel. To archaeologists unearthing these blades centuries later, the magic persists, only translated into metallurgy. The mystery is not diminished by explanation. It deepens. And then there is the question of secrecy. Why did this knowledge not spread? If Viking smiths or their trading partners knew the secret of crucible steel, why did it vanish after the Ulfberht tradition ended? Perhaps the trade routes collapsed, cutting off supply. Perhaps the smiths guarded their methods jealously, and when their line ended, so did the knowledge. Once again, history reveals its fragility. A few broken links in a chain, and centuries of advancement vanish. Today, Ulfberht swords lie in museums, their inscriptions still visible, their edges still sharp. To look at them is to feel both awe and humility. We can explain the chemistry now, we can reproduce crucible steel in laboratories, but the living tradition that made these blades is gone. The hammer's rhythm, the eye for heat, the touch that knew when to strike, those cannot be bottled in equations. They were knowledge embodied, lived, passed hand to hand until silence claimed it. Now picture yourself holding one. It feels light yet strong, balanced perfectly, the name Ulfberht shimmering along its blade. In your grip, you sense centuries collapsing. You realize that technology is not always about invention in the present. Sometimes it is about rediscovery, about remembering what was once known and then forgotten. The sword is more than weapon, it is memory made metal. The Ulfberht Viking sword reminds us that history is not neat, not linear. Knowledge can leap ahead, vanish, return centuries later under another name. We cannot replicate the world that produced it. The forges, the trade routes, the hands of smiths long gone. We can only stand in wonder, humbled by the thought that sometimes the so-called Dark Ages burned brighter than we imagine. In the jungles and plains of Costa Rica, scattered across banana plantations, and hidden in undergrowth, lie hundreds of stone spheres, perfectly round, carved with uncanny precision, some small as a child's toy, others weighing more than 15 tons. They are called Las Bolas, the stone spheres of the Dickies culture. At first glance they seem simple, almost decorative, but stand among them, and the strangeness deepens. These stones were shaped centuries ago, long before the arrival of Europeans, and yet even today, with our machines and lathes, creating such perfect spheres from solid rock is no easy task. The mystery begins with their perfection. Archaeologists have measured them. Many are within millimeters of true spherical form. Imagine the skill required. The Dickies people had no metal tools, no advanced machinery. They carved with stone hammers and perhaps sand, grinding slowly, patiently, until rough boulders became orbs. How many years did it take? How many hands wore down with dust and calluses to make just one? And why create hundreds, scattered across valleys and riverbeds? Purpose feels as elusive as perfection itself. Some spheres are aligned in patterns, groups of 3 or more arranged in straight lines or triangles. Others appear to have been placed to mark astronomical events, pointing towards solstice sunsets or significant star risings. Perhaps they formed calendars of stone, sacred maps etched upon the land. Others were found near the entrances of chiefs' houses or burial mounds, symbols of status and authority. To the Dickies, they may have been emblems of power, representations of cosmic order brought down to earth. Yet the questions multiply. Why spheres? Why not statues, stelas, or temples? A sphere is abstract, universal, without beginning or end. It suggests wholeness, eternity, the cosmos itself. To shape stone into this form is to impose on nature a symbol that transcends culture, a message that feels timeless. Perhaps the spheres were not meant to be seen only as objects, but as living metaphors of the universe, proof that the Dickies aligned themselves with the order of the heavens. Close your eyes and picture the making of one. A rough boulder hauled from a river, dragged across mud and stone. Craftsmen gather, chipping, hammering, grinding, turning the rock slowly. Dust fills the air. Sunlight glints off surfaces, becoming smoother with each day. Weeks become months. The sphere emerges slowly, not by rushing, but by patience. Hands pass over it, feeling imperfections, returning to the hammer, to sand, to polish. Finally, when it is round enough to roll gently across the earth, it is finished, a planet born from stone. The paradox is, in scale, some of the spheres are so massive, they could not be easily moved even with modern machinery. Yet they were transported, placed deliberately, sometimes miles from the quarries. How did the Dickies shift them? Logs as rollers, rafts on rivers, entire communities pulling with ropes. However it was done, the effort must have been immense. And this suggests that the spheres were not idle curiosities. They mattered enough to demand sweat, labor, and time. But meaning slips away. The Dickies left no written language, no records explaining their choices. When Spanish colonizers arrived, the culture was already fading. The stones remained, silent and inscrutable. Some were dynamited by treasure hunters, who believed gold lay hidden inside. Others were moved, rolled into gardens as ornaments, their alignments broken. What survives is only fragments, enough to puzzle us, not enough to answer. Modern researchers have scanned the surfaces, analyzed the geology. The spheres were carved from local stone, granodiorite, limestone, sandstone, nothing supernatural. Yet the precision feels supernatural nonetheless. We can describe how they were made, but not why. Science offers technique, but not meaning. That absence leaves space for myth. Some say the spheres are remnants of Atlantis, or markers left by aliens, or tools for navigating energies of the earth. These theories reveal less about the spheres and more about us, our hunger to explain what we cannot grasp. Now imagine standing in a field where dozens rest. The grass grows long around them. Birds call in the distance. You walk among these silent orbs, their surfaces cool, their forms perfect. Some rise higher than your waist, others rest like seeds waiting to grow. Together, they feel like a language without words, a geometry of silence. You realize that even without explanation, they speak. They remind you that perfection is possible, not in equations or machines, but in the patience of hands shaping stone. The Costa Rica spheres are both humble and profound. Humble, because they are simply rock, carved without advanced tools. Profound because they embody a perfection we still admire, and cannot easily replicate without machines. They blur the boundary between art and technology, between symbol and object. They are messages across time, whispering that meaning is not always written. Sometimes it is carved silently into stone. Their paradox endures. We can measure their diameter, trace their alignments, even replicate their form with computers. But we cannot step into the minds of the Dickies who shaped them. We cannot see the cosmos they saw, or the meanings they breathed into stone. What we hold are orbs without keys, planets scattered across a landscape, silent but eternal. And so they rest, scattered still, guardians of a forgotten worldview. The jungle grows around them. The sun warms their surfaces. The rain polishes their skin. They do not erode easily. They endure as they were meant to. We may not replicate their meaning, but we can still stand among them in awe, humbled by the thought that sometimes the simplest shape is the most impossible. A circle without beginning, a world without end, a perfection carved by ancient hands we will never truly know. In museums across Europe, often tucked into quiet glass cases, sits an object that looks more like a toy from another world than a relic of Rome. A hollow bronze dodecahedron, 12 pentagonal faces, each pierced with a hole of varying size. Small knobs protrude from the corners, giving it a geometric, almost futuristic shape. Dozens have been found, scattered across the former Roman Empire, from Britain to Hungary, dating to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. And yet, despite centuries of study, no one knows what they were for. The Roman dodecahedron remains one of the strangest puzzles of antiquity. At first glance, its geometry suggests mathematics, a 12-sided shape, each hole drilled with precision, the edges smooth, the surfaces cast in bronze, but the Romans left no written record explaining it. Unlike their coins, statues or tools, these dodecahedra bear no inscriptions, no decorations, no explanations. They appear suddenly in the archaeological record and vanish just as mysteriously, leaving only the silent riddle of their form. Theories abound. Some suggest they were used for measuring distances or surveying land. By looking through two opposite holes, one might estimate angles or calculate crop planting. Others believe they served as astronomical devices, aligning with stars or tracking the movement of the sun. Still others propose practical uses, candlestick holders, dice for games, even tools for knitting gloves. Each theory captures a possibility, but none has gained consensus. The objects refuse to reveal their secret. Close your eyes and imagine a Roman soldier stationed at the far edge of the empire, perhaps in rainy Britain. He pulls a small bronze dodecahedron from his pack, holding it up to the horizon. Perhaps he uses it to gauge distance to a target, or to measure angles for artillery. Or imagine a Roman priest in a temple, sunlight streaming through holes, casting patterned shadows on the floor. To him, the dodecahedron may not be practical but sacred, a symbol of cosmic harmony, a shape linking heaven and earth. What deepens the mystery is their distribution. They are found almost exclusively in the northern provinces of Rome, not in Italy itself. They cluster in areas where Rome faced resistance, where legions guarded borders. This suggests a regional function, perhaps military or ritual, but why only there? Why not across the empire? If they were tools of universal use, we would expect them everywhere. Instead, their limited spread only thickens the paradox. Some modern experiments with replicas suggest that the dodecahedron could indeed serve as a rangefinder. By aligning objects through the varying hole sizes, one can estimate distances with surprising accuracy, useful for archers or surveyors. Others, however, dismiss this as coincidence, pointing out the lack of standardized sizes across examples. Each dodecahedron is slightly different, suggesting individual craftsmanship rather than mass production. This irregularity seems odd for a military tool, where uniformity would matter. The knitting glove theory, strange as it sounds, comes from modern reenactors, who discovered that looping yarn through the holes creates consistent finger lengths. It seems plausible, yet it feels too mundane for such finely cast bronze. Why make something so elaborate for a task that simpler tools could achieve? The candle holder theory suffers the same fate. Yes, one could place a wick inside and let light glow through the holes, but again, why such intricacy for such a simple function? Perhaps the answer is that the dodecahedron was not merely functional, but symbolic. Its geometric perfection evokes the Platonic solids, shapes tied to philosophy and cosmic order. To hold a dodecahedron might have been to hold the universe in miniature, a reminder of hidden harmony. It may have been a teaching tool, a ritual object, a bridge between mathematics and mysticism. In this sense, its function was not practical but spiritual, its value not in what it did, but in what it represented. Now imagine standing in a Roman camp at dusk. Soldiers gather around a fire, armor glinting in the fading light. One pulls out a bronze dodecahedron, and others lean closer. They pass it around, each peering through the holes, each turning it in their hands. To some it is a puzzle, to others a tool, to others a sacred charm. No one explanation dominates, because meaning itself may have been layered. Perhaps that is why we struggle to decode it. It was not one thing, but many. The paradox of the Roman dodecahedron is that it embodies human curiosity. It invites theories endlessly, reflecting our own need for answers. But perhaps its true power lies in resisting explanation. By refusing to be pinned down, it reminds us that not all objects are meant to be solved. Some are meant to provoke wonder, to force us to live with mystery. Today, these dodecahedra sit behind glass, their bronze darkened with age. Tourists glance, puzzled, and move on. But if you pause, if you let your eyes linger on the geometry, you feel its quiet pull. The shape is too deliberate, the design too precise, to be meaningless. Yet the silence of history holds firm. We cannot replicate its purpose, because we cannot replicate the worldview that created it. The Roman Dodecahedron is not only a lost technology, but a lost thought. It is a window into a way of seeing the world that has closed, leaving us only the object itself, perfect, enigmatic, eternal. It reminds us that technology is not always wires or engines. Sometimes it is a shape, a form, a riddle cast in bronze, whispering from the past. Not everything you find can be explained. In the tropical lowlands of present-day Mexico, hidden beneath centuries of jungle growth, archaeologists began uncovering colossal faces carved from stone. Each one towers up to 10 feet tall, weighing as much as 40 tons. Their features bold and unmistakable, broad noses, full lips, staring eyes, and elaborate headgear. These are the Olmec heads, created nearly 3,000 years ago by a civilization so ancient it is often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. They are among the most extraordinary relics of the ancient world, both breathtaking and baffling. The sheer scale is the first mystery. The Olmec carved these giant heads from basalt boulders, transported from quarries dozens of miles away, without wheels, without beasts of burden. They somehow hauled stones weighing as much as a fully loaded truck across rivers and forests. Imagine the effort. Hundreds of workers dragging, rolling, perhaps floating the stones on rafts, coordinating every step so the colossal blocks did not crack or sink. To move one head was a feat of logistics we would struggle to replicate without cranes and trucks. Once delivered, the boulders were transformed into faces with astonishing precision. The details are lifelike, individual, almost portrait-like. Each head seems to represent a specific ruler or elite figure, immortalized in stone. Their helmets suggest warriors or ball players, though no one knows for certain. The expressions are stern, serious, filled with authority. They are not anonymous symbols. They are people remembered, their identities preserved even as their names are lost. Close your eyes and imagine standing before one of these heads in the jungle. The air is heavy with humidity. Birds call in the canopy. Insects hum. The face towers above you, unblinking, its lips pressed tight as though guarding secrets. Its eyes stare through centuries, watching you as if you are the intruder. You feel small, insignificant, as though you have stumbled into a council of silent giants. The Olmec rulers may be long gone, but their presence lingers in stone, larger than life, larger than time. The paradox deepens when you consider the tools available. The Olmec had no metal chisels, no iron hammers. They carved these massive basalt heads with stone tools, grinding and pecking slowly, day after day, until form emerged. The patience required is almost unimaginable. To carve one head may have taken years, perhaps decades. Yet they made at least 17 of them, scattered across sites like San Lorenzo and La Venta. Such devotion to monument making suggests a cultural importance far beyond decoration. But what was their purpose? Were they guardians, placed at ceremonial centers to intimidate and inspire? Were they portraits of rulers, ensuring their power extended beyond death? Or did they serve as anchors of myth, connecting the human world to the divine? The Olmec left no written records, no inscriptions on the heads themselves. Their silence is complete, leaving us to guess at the voices they once embodied. Some have proposed that the heads were aligned, or placed according to astronomical principles, like many other Mesoamerican monuments. Others see them as markers of sacred ball games, with the helmets resembling those worn by players. Still others imagine they were part of rituals, witnesses to offerings, sacrifices, or celebrations. None of these theories can be proven. The heads refuse to explain themselves. What makes them haunting is not only their size but their individuality. Each head is different. Some wear flat helmets, others rounded. Some have broad faces, others narrower. Their features suggest they represent real people, rulers whose identities were once well known. In a world without writing, perhaps this was how memory endured, not in books but in stone faces that could never be forgotten. Yet in forgetting their names, we are left with monuments without captions, portraits without context. Imagine the unveiling of one. Workers clear the final chips of stone, priests chant, drums beat, and the colossal face is revealed to the people. The crowd gasps, seeing their leader immortalized, godlike, eternal. The ruler himself stands before it, flesh beside stone, knowing his likeness will outlast his life. It is both power and humility, to know that you are frozen forever in silence, gazing at future generations who will never know your name. Today, the heads sit in open-air museums, their surfaces weathered by rain and sun. Tourists pose beside them, dwarfed by their scale, yet the aura remains. Even stripped from their original context, even robbed of their cultural language, they radiate authority. Their eyes still seem to see, their silence still seems deliberate. They are not ruined relics but living presences, commanding respect. The paradox of the Olmec heads is that they are at once intimate and incomprehensible. Intimate, because they are faces, human, recognizable, expressive; incomprehensible, because we do not know who they were, why they were made, or how they were moved. They are both the most personal of monuments, and the most mysterious. And perhaps that is why they endure. They remind us that technology is not always machines or formulas. Sometimes it is the ability to move mountains of stone, to shape them with patience, to preserve memory in silence. The Olmec did this with no iron, no wheels, no writing, yet their legacy remains, larger than the civilizations that followed. The colossal heads stare on, through jungle and ruin, through conquest and erasure, through centuries of silence. They remind us that power can be carved into stone, that memory can outlast words, and that sometimes the greatest mysteries of technology are not about progress, but about presence. In the heart of Delhi, within the courtyard of the Kyolpebe Minar complex, stands a column of iron that has defied time itself, more than 1,600 years old, rising over 20 feet into the sky. The iron pillar of Delhi gleams darkly under the sun, its surface smooth, its inscriptions still visible. Unlike most iron, it has not rusted away. Rain has fallen, monsoons have raged, the air has shifted for centuries, yet the pillar remains intact. A silent sentinel of metallurgy so advanced that modern scientists still debate how it was achieved. Ordinary iron corrodes quickly, turning to flakes of rust within decades. But the iron pillar endures, not just surviving, but thriving in the open air. Its inscription, written in Sanskrit, praises King Chandragupta II of the Gupta Empire, dating the pillar to the 4th century CE. It was likely erected as a victory column, a symbol of imperial glory. Yet over time, its true fame shifted from the deeds it celebrated to the miracle of its endurance. How could ancient blacksmiths forge iron so pure, so stable, that it resists rust for more than a millennium? The mystery begins with its size. The pillar weighs more than 6 tons, forged from an enormous mass of wrought iron. Modern steel plants struggle to create single lumps of such purity without advanced furnaces. Yet, Gupta artisans, working with charcoal fires and simple tools, somehow achieved it. Metallurgists analyzing the pillar have found an unusually high level of phosphorus and very little sulfur or manganese. These unusual properties created a protective film, a thin layer of iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate that coats the surface. This passive layer renews itself, shielding the pillar from further corrosion. In essence, the metal heals itself. But the process of making such iron is just as extraordinary. To forge a mass so large, ancient smiths likely welded together smaller lumps of wrought iron, hammering them repeatedly at high heat until they fused seamlessly. This was not simply brute force, it required control, patience, and knowledge of chemistry beyond what we typically credit to the era. Some scholars suggest the Gupta metallurgists had inherited traditions of ironworking refined over centuries, their skill reaching a peak just at the moment the pillar was cast. Others wonder if this was a singular achievement, a perfect storm of material, method, and mastery never repeated. Close your eyes and imagine the forging. A blazing furnace roars, bellows pumping, sparks cascading into night. Dozens of smiths sweat and strain, hammering glowing lumps of iron until they fuse into one body. The air smells of charcoal, metal, and sweat. Slowly, over weeks, perhaps months, the pillar takes form, taller than any man, gleaming like liquid fire. When it finally cools, it is lifted upright, inscribed with words of victory, and planted into the earth. The empire may crumble, kings may die, but the pillar will stand. And it does, still today. The paradox of the iron pillar is that its immortality was not intended, or at least not explained. The inscription praises a king, not the metallurgists. The makers did not boast of their technique. They left no manuals, no formulas, no explanations. The science that kept the pillar intact may have been unrecognized by the very men who created it, discovered by tradition, preserved by ritual, lost again as history moved on. By the Middle Ages, Indian ironworking had declined, and the secret was gone. The pillar remained, but the knowledge that made it possible had evaporated. What makes it more haunting is how fragile knowledge truly is. In our time, we have machines that can replicate the chemical properties of the pillar. We can create stainless steels and corrosion-resistant alloys. Yet to recreate this pillar by hand, with ancient techniques, would be nearly impossible. We can explain its endurance, but we cannot truly replicate the cultural and technological world that produced it. The pillar is not only an object, it is the echo of a forgotten tradition. Imagine visiting the pillar at night. The moonlight silvers its surface, the courtyard quiet, the city around it sleeping. You run your hand across the metal, expecting roughness, but finding smoothness instead. The iron feels cold, ancient, alive. You realize this surface has been touched by countless generations, kings, pilgrims, conquerors, tourists, yet it remains unchanged. It has witnessed empires rise and fall, religions spread, wars erupt, and still it stands, indifferent to time. For centuries, locals believed it had mystical powers. Some said embracing it would bring good fortune. Others thought it was forged from celestial metal, a gift from the gods. To scientists, the truth is no less wondrous. It is an achievement of human genius, a mastery of fire and ore, so advanced that it outlasts both empire and memory. The iron pillar is not the only ancient artifact of extraordinary metallurgy. Other examples exist in India and beyond. Pillars, tools, and weapons that resist corrosion unnaturally. But none equal this in scale, in endurance, in sheer mystery. It is both ordinary iron and something more, a paradox that humbles us. The pillar stands still, silent and proud, whispering across 16 centuries. Knowledge can endure in matter even when it is lost in memory. We cannot replicate the exact tradition that forged it. We can only stand in awe, looking up at a column that refuses to die. In the Bekia Valley of Lebanon lies Baalbek, an ancient site layered with history, Phoenician, Greek, Roman, and beyond. But beneath its temples and ruins is something even more astounding. Stone blocks so massive they defy imagination. At the base of the Temple of Jupiter are 3 blocks known as the Trilithon, each weighing around 800 tons. Nearby lies another monolith, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at over 1,000 tons. And in recent excavations, an even larger block was found, weighing more than 1,600 tons, the heaviest stone ever carved by human hands. Yet we do not know how these giants were moved, lifted, or placed with such precision. The Trilithon stones are fitted into the foundation of the temple platform with uncanny accuracy. They sit aligned, level, and tightly joined, as if set by cranes of steel. But this was nearly 2,000 years ago. The Romans built atop Baalbek, but many believe the foundation is older, inherited from earlier civilizations. Whoever placed these blocks worked with a technology, or at least a determination, that leaves modern engineers astonished. Consider the numbers. A 1,000-ton stone is too heavy for most modern cranes. Even today, moving such mass requires specialized machinery, coordinated teams, and careful planning. The idea that ancient builders transported and raised them without engines seems almost absurd. Did they use sledges, ropes, rollers? Did they drag them across the ground with sheer manpower? The incline of the terrain makes such theories difficult. The stones were not only quarried nearby, but lifted several meters to fit into place. No single explanation satisfies the magnitude of the feat. Close your eyes and imagine the quarry. A block lies half-carved, enormous, stretching longer than a bus, taller than a man, glinting in the sun. Workers chip at its sides, dust rising in clouds, hammers ringing. Slowly, the stone takes form, detached from the earth, but still rooted in its pit. Then comes the impossible question, how to move it. Ropes strain, wood creaks, chants rise as hundreds push and pull. The block shifts, groaning like the earth itself. Somehow, inch by inch, they drag it toward the temple. To witness it would be to watch a miracle in motion. Theories multiply, none definitive. Some scholars suggest thousands of workers with wooden rollers and sledges could have managed it. Others propose ramps of packed earth, lifting the stones gradually. Yet the precision of placement, each block aligned without mortar, suggests more than brute force. It suggests a system, a mastery of logistics, perhaps even forgotten machines of leverage and counterweight. Ancient texts mention cranes and pulleys, but none capable of handling such weight. The builders of Baalbek knew something we no longer do. And then there is the question of purpose. Why use stones so massive when smaller ones would suffice? The Romans, masters of concrete and arches, did not need such foundations. Perhaps they inherited an older platform, a sacred base already ancient in their time. Some argue it was meant to impress, to show power beyond ordinary limits. Others imagine cosmic symbolism, the weight itself a statement of eternity, permanence, invulnerability. To move mountains is to prove mastery over nature, to declare divine authority. The site itself adds to the mystery. Baalbek was sacred for millennia, a place of gods and temples. The Romans dedicated it to Jupiter, the Greeks before them to Zeus, and earlier still it may have been a Phoenician sanctuary to Baalbek. The massive stones at its foundation seem to root the site into myth, as if the gods themselves demanded a platform beyond human scale. Standing before them, you feel that sense not simply of construction, but of worship in stone. Now, imagine the finished temple. The massive trilithon stones hidden in the base, invisible to ordinary worshippers. Above them rise columns taller than buildings, gleaming marble, statues of gods. The crowd gathers, sacrifices burn, music swells, and yet beneath it all lie blocks so massive that even time itself cannot move them. Earthquakes have shattered columns, wars have toppled walls, empires have come and gone, but the trilithon remains, unmoved, unbroken, eternal. The paradox of Baalbek is that its foundations are stronger and more mysterious than its temples. The gods worshipped there have faded, their statues crumbled, their names forgotten, but the stones endure, silent and indifferent, their purpose unknown. Were they feats of engineering, expressions of devotion, or symbols of something we cannot translate? The stones do not answer, they simply exist, a riddle carved into bedrock. Modern attempts to move similar blocks often fail. Even with cranes and trucks, lifting and transporting such weights is perilous. Yet here in antiquity, it was done repeatedly, not once, not twice, but many times. The stone of the pregnant woman still lies in its quarry, abandoned perhaps because it cracked too heavy to be moved. But the attempt itself shows the ambition. The builders did not fear impossibility, they embraced it, shaping stones larger than life, daring future generations to wonder how. Standing at Baalbek today, you feel that wonder. The air is dry, the valley stretches wide, and in the heat the stones radiate their own warmth. You place your hand on their surface, rough yet enduring, and you realize you are touching something no machine has equaled. The stone humbles you, as it must have humbled those who first saw it rise into place. The Baalbek monoliths are not just stones, they are paradoxes. Too heavy to move, yet moved. Too large to place, yet placed. Too impossible to exist, yet standing still. They remind us that human ambition has always reached for the impossible, and sometimes, without explanation, achieved it. Among the strangest tales in ancient technology is one that survives not in stone ruins or metal relics, but in legend. In Jewish tradition, the building of Solomon's temple, one of the holiest structures ever constructed, involved a mysterious tool known as the shamir. This was no ordinary chisel, no hammer or blade. The shamir, it was said, could cut through the hardest stone, even diamond, without striking or carving. It split rock effortlessly, as if nature itself obeyed it. And yet, though its powers are described in sacred texts, the shamir itself has vanished, leaving behind only whispers of a technology that feels more like myth than craft. The story appears in the Talmud and other rabbinical writings. According to these sources, when Solomon built his temple in Jerusalem, he was forbidden to use iron tools, which were associated with war and bloodshed. The house of God, it was believed, could not be touched by weapons of man, and so Solomon turned to the shamir, a tool of divine origin, created at the dawn of time, entrusted to him for the holy task. With it, massive stones were cut and shaped without violence, fitting together perfectly to form a temple unlike any other. Descriptions of the shamir vary. Some say it was a worm or insect, tiny yet imbued with the power to split stones simply by crawling across it. Others imagine it as a crystalline substance, glowing with inner energy. Still others describe it as a kind of living ray, a tool of pure energy or divine fire. Whatever its form, the shamir was said to be so powerful, it had to be stored carefully, wrapped in wool, and placed inside a lead container, for any harder vessel would shatter under its force. Legends tell of how the shamir was guarded by mythical beings, or hidden until summoned by Solomon. Some accounts say it was brought to him by a demon, compelled to serve. Others say it was preserved since the time of Moses, used first to inscribe the 10 Commandments into stone, In every version, the shamir is portrayed not as invention but as gift, knowledge too great to be ordinary, power borrowed from the divine. Yet the question lingers, could there have been a real technology hidden behind the myth? Some modern theorists suggest the shamir may have been a lost chemical compound, capable of weakening stone. Ancient peoples knew of corrosive substances, acids that etched and split rock. Others propose radioactive minerals, their invisible energy capable of altering matter. Still others imagine concentrated light, perhaps a lens or crystal that focused solar rays to heat and fracture stone. Each idea is compelling, but none fits perfectly. The shamir remains elusive, slipping from science back into myth. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. Builders stand before a massive block of stone too large for chisels, too sacred for iron. A priest approaches, carrying a small container. He removes the shamir, and as it touches the rock, a crack spreads, silent and effortless. The stone parts neatly, as though cut by invisible hands. The workers step back in awe, for they have seen something beyond skill, beyond labor. They have seen a miracle. And slowly, stone by stone, the temple rises, each block perfectly shaped, fitted together with no hammer strikes, no clang of metal, only silence, precision, and the whisper of mystery. The paradox of the shamir is that it belongs both to faith and to technology. To believers, it was a divine tool, a sign that God himself oversaw the temple's construction. To skeptics, it is a legend crafted to explain the impossibly precise stonework of the ancient world. Yet in either case, it points to a truth. Human beings have always encountered limits and sought ways to transcend them. Whether by myth or science, we imagine tools that can cut where hands cannot. What makes the shamir haunting is its disappearance. Unlike the Iron Pillar of Delhi or the Baalbek monoliths, no physical trace survives. There is no relic to study, no fragment to analyze. All we have are words, stories carried through centuries. This absence makes it even more powerful. For when an object is gone, it becomes pure imagination. A canvas for every theory, a mirror for every desire. The shamir is not only a lost tool, but a reminder of how much of history is hidden in silence. And yet, the temple stood. Its stones, massive and perfectly cut, testify to a skill we still marvel at. Whether achieved by shamir or by patient craftsmanship, the effect is the same, precision so great it borders on the impossible. The walls rose without mortar, their blocks locking like puzzle pieces, enduring through centuries of destruction and rebuilding. The temple itself is gone, but the legend of its making endures, carried by the mystery of a tool we cannot replicate. Now imagine holding the shamir in your own hands. It is small, unassuming, perhaps no larger than a pebble. Yet within it hums a force that frightens you, a power too vast for control. You touch it to stone, and the world reshapes itself before your eyes. In that moment, you feel the paradox, technology and miracle, invention and myth, indistinguishable. The shamir is not only a tool, it is a story of human longing for mastery over the unyielding, for a way to touch eternity. In the end, the shamir remains a riddle. Was it real, a forgotten science? Was it symbolic, a metaphor for divine guidance? Or was it simply legend, told to remind us that some creations are beyond human power? We cannot know, but its silence speaks as loudly as any artifact. It tells us that ancient technology is not always stone and bronze. Sometimes it is memory, myth, and mystery woven together, a tool we cannot hold, but one we can still imagine. In the dusty ruins near Baghdad, archaeologists once uncovered clay jars that looked deceptively ordinary. They were not large, nor adorned with inscriptions of grandeur, but inside lay copper cylinders, iron rods, and traces of acidic residue. These artifacts, dating back nearly 2,000 years to the Parthian era, ignited one of the great debates of archaeology. Were they primitive energy devices, the world's first batteries? If true, they suggest that electricity, a force we consider modern, may have been tapped in antiquity, long before Volta, long before Franklin, long before we thought humans even conceived of such power. The so-called Parthian batteries were small, about 6 inches tall. A clay jar held a copper tube, within which was placed an iron rod. Bitumen sealed the edges, and when the vessel was filled with an acidic liquid, vinegar, grape juice, or lemon juice, a small electric current could be generated. Experiments with replicas confirm this. The jars produce about half a volt each, enough to shock the skin to cause tingling, or to electroplate a small object. If ancient hands knew this, then they had stumbled upon a secret of extraordinary power. But the questions are many. Did the Parthians understand what they had made, or was it an accident? Were these devices truly used as batteries, or are we projecting modern interpretations onto ancient relics? Without wires, lamps, or other devices found alongside them, their purpose remains elusive, and yet the possibility is intoxicating. Imagine a Parthian priest dipping a rod into the jar, producing a faint spark or a mysterious tingle, and declaring it divine. To those watching, it would not be science but miracle, proof of heavenly fire captured in clay. Some researchers argue the devices were used for electroplating. Gold or silver ions could be deposited onto jewelry or statues, giving them a brilliance otherwise impossible. Replicas have shown this to be feasible, though no definitively electroplated artifacts from that era have been linked directly to the jars. Others suggest medical use, with small shocks employed to stimulate or heal, much as electricity is used therapeutically today. Still others believe they were ritual objects, designed not for practical function but for wonder, to impress with sparks and strange sensations. And then come the skeptics. Many archaeologists insist the jars may not have been batteries at all. Perhaps they were simple storage vessels, their resemblance to modern cells coincidental. The copper and iron may have served mundane purposes, the acidic residues a result of ordinary use. Without clear context, it is impossible to be certain. The jars, after all, are humble, not grand inventions inscribed with purpose. They whisper rather than shout. Close your eyes and picture one in use. A craftsman lowers a small pendant into the jar. Minutes later, he withdraws it, its surface glimmering with a thin layer of gold. The object is no longer ordinary. It shines with divine brilliance, or imagine a priest using it in ceremony. He touches the rod to his skin, flinches at the spark, and the gathered crowd gasps. To them, the jar is a vessel of fire hidden in clay, proof that unseen forces inhabit the world. What makes the Parthian energy device so haunting is not only whether it worked, but what it represents about human curiosity. Even if they did not fully understand electricity, perhaps they stumbled upon it and found uses that suited their world. Knowledge is often partial, fragmented, applied in ways foreign to us. For the Parthians, the jars may not have been batteries in our sense, but they may still have been tools of power, symbolic, ritualistic, or practical in ways we cannot easily reconstruct. The paradox is sharp. We can reproduce the effect easily, yet we cannot replicate the meaning. Our replicas shock, spark, and plate metal, but they do not tell us how the Parthians saw them, how they explained the strange forces within. For us, it is chemistry. For them, it may have been magic. And that is the gulf between knowing how and knowing why. Imagine walking through a Parthian workshop 2,000 years ago. Clay jars line a table, their interiors fitted with copper and iron. The air smells of vinegar and smoke. A craftsman lowers an object into the liquid, waits, and lifts it shimmering. Others whisper prayers, convinced this is divine blessing. The jar hums quietly in your imagination, not with wires or circuits, but with the awe of discovery. You realize that technology is not only machines, it is the human response to mystery. Today, the jars sit in museums, stripped of their context, their mystery reduced to fragments of clay and corroded metal. Scientists test them, tourists glance at them, but the question remains unresolved. Were they true batteries, centuries before their time, or are we reading too much into broken jars? The silence of history refuses to answer, and that is their true power. The Parthian energy devices, whether functional or not, force us to confront our assumptions. We believe electricity is modern, but perhaps the ancients glimpsed it too. Perhaps knowledge sparks in many times, many places, only to be lost and found again. The jars remind us that history is not linear progress, but a mosaic of discoveries, some enduring, others flickering briefly before vanishing. The Parthian batteries may never reveal their full truth, yet in their silence they tell us something profound. The line between science and magic is thin, and human beings have always sought to capture invisible forces. Whether they powered gold, healed bodies, or awed worshippers, they remain symbols of a curiosity we cannot replicate. Clay vessels that may once have held the fire of the gods. In the basalt cliffs of Maharashtra, India, a horseshoe-shaped gorge hides one of humanity's greatest architectural enigmas. Cut directly into the rock are the Ajanta caves, temples and monasteries carved between the 2nd century BCE and the 6th century CE. At first glance, they look like openings in the cliffside, but step inside and you enter vast halls, pillared chambers, and sanctuaries filled with sculptures and murals. What makes Ajanta so astonishing is not only its beauty, but its method. The caves were not built by adding stone, but by subtracting it. Entire cathedrals were carved downward, from the top of the cliff to the floor, in solid rock. Imagine beginning with nothing but a cliff face. Workers traced out a doorway, then tunneled inward, chiseling away stone day after day, year after year, until entire chambers emerged. They carved roofs with vaulted ribs, walls with intricate reliefs, and columns rising in perfect symmetry. All of this was achieved without modern tools, without dynamite, without electricity. The only light was oil lamps and torches flickering in the dust-choked air. And yet the results rival, even surpass, the great cathedrals of Europe. The murals that still cling to the walls tell Buddhist stories, the Jataka tales of the Buddha's previous lives, scenes of compassion, sacrifice, and enlightenment. Painted with natural pigments, they glow with colors that remain vibrant after more than 1,000 years. Figures of kings, queens, monks, and animals unfold in graceful detail, their expressions alive, their gestures delicate. The caves are not only architecture, but art galleries, storytelling halls, and sanctuaries for meditation. The paradox lies in the precision. How did the builders maintain symmetry when working entirely by subtraction? Without scaffolding, without external perspectives, they cut pillars evenly, carved ceilings in perfect arcs, and aligned chambers along geometric axes. To make even one mistake, to chisel too far, to misjudge an angle, would ruin the entire cave. Yet cave after cave, hall after hall, they achieved balance. It suggests an extraordinary system of planning and surveying, knowledge of geometry and proportion that rivals modern architectural practice. Close your eyes and picture the work. The clang of chisels rings in the dark. The smell of oil smoke thicken the air. Hundreds of workers labor in shifts, their tools striking rhythmically, their chants echoing off stone walls. Slowly, a flat wall becomes an arch, a block becomes a statue, a chamber opens into space. Monks move silently among them, chanting sutras, blessing the work. The cave itself becomes sacred, not at completion, but in the very act of carving. Some scholars believe the caves were financed by wealthy patrons, kings and merchants who sought merit through generosity. Others see them as communal projects of devotion, where artists, monks, and laborers worked together for spiritual purpose. What unites both ideas is that Ajanta was not merely construction, it was meditation in stone. To carve was to worship, to paint was to pray, to labor was to approach enlightenment. The engineering, too, astonishes. Rock-cut architecture requires not only artistry, but geology. Carvers had to understand the stone, its grain, its weaknesses. A wrong strike could fracture an entire wall, yet they carved with such mastery that the caves remained stable after centuries of monsoons and earthquakes. The ceilings soar overhead without collapsing, supported by carved columns that remain as strong as the living rock from which they emerged. In this way, Ajanta is not only art but science, a fusion of spiritual devotion and technical brilliance. And then, there is the light. The caves are dark, yet the paintings were designed to glow in the flicker of oil lamps. The artists used shading and perspective to make figures appear alive, their eyes following you, their gestures inviting you into stories. Imagine sitting cross-legged in that dim glow, the walls alive with color, the air thick with incense and chanting. The experience would not have been passive but immersive, a spiritual theater carved into the earth. The paradox is that while Ajanta is preserved, its methods are lost. We can see the results, but we cannot replicate the process in its entirety. Modern machines could carve rock faster, but not with the same intimacy, not with the same devotion. Ajanta was not simply construction, it was communion, a merging of human skill and spiritual purpose. That fusion is what we cannot replicate, because it depended on a worldview in which art, labor, and faith were inseparable. Now imagine the silence after the workers have gone. The monks departed, the torches extinguished. The caves sit empty, carved into permanence, waiting for rediscovery. Centuries later, in 1819, a British officer stumbles upon them while hunting tigers. He enters, torch in hand, and the painted figures stare back across 1,000 years. Still vivid, still alive. The caves had waited in silence, preserving a world forgotten, a message in stone and color that refused to fade. Today, the Ajanta caves are celebrated as World Heritage, admired for their beauty. Tourists walk their halls, cameras flashing, voices echoing. Yet the real wonder is not simply what you see, but how it was made. To carve temples from living rock, with precision and grace, without machines, is to embody a kind of genius we no longer possess. Ajanta is not only art, not only architecture, but technology of the spirit, a technology we cannot replicate, because it required not only skill but a way of seeing the world we have lost. In Homestead, Florida, there stands a monument to obsession and mystery, a place known simply as Coral Castle. At first glance it looks like a garden of giant stone blocks, walls and sculptures, but then you learn the riddle. It was built by a single man, Edward Lidskalnin, working alone, mostly at night, from 1923 until 1951. Ed was a slight, sickly Latvian immigrant, weighing barely 100 pounds. Yet somehow, he quarried, transported, and set into place more than 1,100 tons of coral rock, carving them into towers, chairs, gates, and perfectly balanced structures, all without modern machinery. The paradox begins with the stones themselves. Some weigh several tons each, cut with clean edges and fitted so tightly together that you cannot slip a piece of paper between them. A 9-ton gate rotates so smoothly on a pivot that even a child could push it open. Ed carved furniture, telescopes, sundials, and even a crescent moon, all with astonishing precision. To walk among them is to feel as though the entire place was assembled not by hands but by some secret force. Ed himself never explained his method. When asked, he only smiled and said he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids. Neighbors claimed to see him moving blocks at night, but never with machines. Sometimes they said they saw him singing to the stones, chanting in a strange rhythm as though coaxing them to move. Others insisted he used magnets, pulleys, and simple levers in ways that defied normal understanding. But no one ever caught him in the act, and Ed guarded his secret carefully until his death. The castle itself is a paradoxical kind of technology. It is not simply an art piece, but a demonstration. Gates rotate with such perfect balance, they seem weightless. Walls stand firm against storms. Stone carvings remain crisp decades later. The techniques used hint at some deep understanding of weight, leverage, and perhaps something beyond our current physics. Could it be that Ed discovered principles of resonance, of sound, of magnetism, that allowed him to reduce the effective weight of stone? Or was it, as skeptics claim, simply the ingenuity of a man who mastered basic tools with extraordinary patience? Picture Ed at work. A lantern glows in the humid Florida night. He stands among his coral blocks, thin and gaunt, his hands rough with labor. A chisel strikes stone, a lever creaks, a chain groans, but somehow, impossibly, a multi-ton block shifts, tilts and settles into place with precision. The night swallows the sound, leaving only silence, as if the stone itself had agreed to move. To the few who spied on him, it seemed less like construction and more like ritual. The riddle deepens when we consider the 9-ton gate, balanced so perfectly on a hidden bearing. It once turned at the push of a finger. When it eventually stopped working in the 1980s, engineers dismantled it. They found a precise cavity drilled through the stone, housing an old truck bearing set in perfect alignment. How did Ed, with primitive tools, drill such a flawless hole through solid coral? And how did he lift and balance a 9-ton block on a bearing without cranes? The mystery remained even as modern machinery was required to repair it. Ed lived alone in the castle, sleeping in a small room, giving tours for 25 cents, and speaking cryptically about energy, magnetism, and hidden knowledge. He published pamphlets on magnetic current, suggesting he believed all matter could be influenced by unseen forces. His writings are difficult to follow, full of strange diagrams and vague explanations, yet perhaps hidden within them lies a glimpse of his secret, an intuitive understanding of balance, resonance, and natural energy that we have not yet rediscovered. Some see Coral Castle as evidence of lost ancient knowledge, preserved not in texts but in practice. Ed's cryptic remark about the pyramids invites the idea that he rediscovered techniques once used by Egyptians or other ancient builders, methods not based on brute force but on subtle principles of physics. Perhaps he harnessed sound, vibration, or magnetism to alter the weight of stone. Perhaps the secret lies in harmony, not strength. The riddle endures because we cannot test it. Ed is gone, and the method died with him. And so Coral Castle stands today as both wonder and warning. Tourists wander its paths, marvel at its furniture, touch its gates and ask how it was done. Guides tell stories, skeptics shrug, and believers whisper about hidden energies. Yet no one can replicate it alone, without cranes, without machines, without help. The paradox is not only in the stones but in the man. How could one frail, reclusive figure accomplish what teams of workers with modern tools would struggle to replicate? Close your eyes and imagine standing inside the castle at dusk. The coral walls glow faintly in the fading light, shadows stretching across carved shapes. You touch the stone, cool and solid, and feel the immovable weight beneath your hand. Yet you know this weight was once moved by one man, who perhaps sang it into place. You listen, but the air is silent, the secret swallowed by the night. What remains is not an answer, but a riddle carved into stone, a riddle that defies explanation, that humbles our machines, that whispers of powers forgotten. Coral Castle is not just a monument. It is a paradox, a standing reminder that knowledge does not only live in textbooks and laboratories. Sometimes it lives in a single mind, hidden, stubborn, and silent. Sometimes it carves itself into coral under the stars, leaving behind a puzzle that centuries of science cannot solve. Perhaps Ed truly did know the secrets of the pyramids. Or perhaps the greater secret is this, that genius, mystery, and wonder still walk among us, disguised as frailty, carving impossible castles when no one is watching. In a library at Yale, kept under glass like a relic of another world, lies a book that should not exist. Known as the Voynich manuscript. It is a small volume of vellum pages, filled with elegant script and fantastical illustrations. At first it looks like any medieval herbal, a book meant to catalogue plants and remedies. But look closer, and the illusion falls apart. The plants are unrecognizable, hybrid creations of leaves and flowers that never grew on Earth. The text flows in graceful loops and curves, written in an alphabet no one has ever seen before, in a language no one has ever decoded. The paradox begins with its very existence. A book, by its nature, is a vessel of communication. Yet here is a book that speaks in perfect, orderly script, but to no one. Cryptographers, linguists, mathematicians, even codebreakers from World War II have tried to unlock its secrets, but all have failed. It is too consistent to be meaningless scribbles. It obeys patterns, frequencies, repetitions, as though it is a true language, and yet it resists translation. The words are silent, locked, like a voice trapped behind glass. Flip through its pages, and the mystery deepens. There are sections filled with astronomical diagrams, star charts and zodiac symbols, yet many do not match known constellations. There are naked women bathing in strange green pools connected by pipes, as if illustrating some lost medical or alchemical practice. There are recipes, charts and sequences of symbols that suggest order and knowledge, but the knowledge, whatever it is sealed. We can touch the pages, but not the meaning. Consider the effort it took to create such a book. The vellum has been dated to the early 15th century, around 1404-1438. The ink is genuine, the pigments consistent with medieval Europe. This means it is no modern hoax. Someone in that age, centuries before modern science, devoted years to crafting a text in a completely invented script, illustrating it with hundreds of images. Why would they? To what purpose? To encode a body of secret knowledge, perhaps alchemy or medicine, hidden from prying eyes? Or was it a work of art, a private dream rendered in ink, meant for no one but its author? The paradox intensifies when we consider how impossible it is to replicate. We can forge letters, we can copy alphabets, but to sustain an entire book of consistent script in a new language, complete with grammar-like structures, without error, is beyond casual invention. Whoever wrote this was meticulous, careful, and deeply committed. To replicate it today, you would need not just artistry but an invented mind, capable of sustaining a language that does not exist. Even our machines, our computers, struggle to determine whether it is true language or an elaborate cipher. Cryptographers from the US and British intelligence services studied it during wartime, hoping it might contain enemy codes. They could not crack it. Modern artificial intelligence has been trained on it, and while some claim fragments resemble ancient Romance languages, no consensus has formed. Each new theory, that it is an encoded medical text, a lost recipe book, a mystical grimoire, or even an elaborate hoax, eventually collapses under scrutiny. The manuscript resists all attempts to define it, like smoke slipping through fingers. Now imagine holding it in your hands. The vellum is smooth, the ink faint, but still alive after 6 centuries. Your eyes trace the lines of script, so fluid, so confident. Whoever wrote this did not hesitate. They believed in what they were writing. You turn the page, and there is a plant with curling leaves. its roots shaped like organs, its flowers like stars. You turn another page, and there is a naked figure stepping into a green pool, her hair curling, her face serene, surrounded by other figures in pipes and basins. You feel as though you were staring into a window of another world, one where the laws of biology, astronomy, and language were bent by another logic entirely. The paradox of the Voynich manuscript is not simply that we cannot read it, it is that it taunts us with its legibility. It looks like language. It feels like knowledge. Our brains ache to decode it, because everything about it suggests meaning, but the meaning remains locked, and so the book becomes a mirror. What you see in it is what you bring. Some see alien knowledge, some see medieval mysticism, some see a prank taken too far. But in the silence of its pages, it holds us all. Perhaps the cruelest part is this: the secret may be gone forever. If the author left no key, no Rosetta Stone, then the book is nothing but an orphaned script, its language unanchored, unmoored, adrift in time. The plants may have referred to remedies once known, the diagrams to practices once common, the recipes to potions once brewed, but now they are lost. The book remains, but the world that understood it has vanished. And so the Voynich manuscript lives as both artifact and paradox. It is a book without a reader, a language without a speaker, a message without a recipient. It mocks our cleverness, humbles our machines, and whispers of knowledge just beyond reach. To replicate it would not just mean copying ink on vellum, it would mean inventing a world entire, a world of plants, stars, and rituals, governed by rules we cannot guess. Close your eyes now, and picture that world. A scribe sits by candlelight in the 1400s, dipping quill into ink, his hand flowing across vellum. He writes symbols only he understands, sketching plants from memory, drawing women in baths, tracing stars that no one else will recognize. He knows what it means, or believes he does. Perhaps it was medicine, perhaps it was magic, perhaps it was madness. But the book survives, while he does not, and we are left with silence. The paradox is not just in the manuscript's code, but in time itself. A language can outlive its speaker, but without a listener, it becomes a riddle. The Voynich manuscript is that riddle, a voice calling across 6 centuries, in words we cannot read, a code that will not break, a story we cannot hear. And yet, it keeps whispering, page after page, that there are still mysteries written in plain sight, and that not all books are meant to be understood. In 1999, 2 treasure hunters with metal detectors wandered through a forested hill in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany. They were hoping for coins, jewelry, maybe fragments of an old weapon. Instead, they uncovered a disc of bronze, about a foot across, covered in green patina from centuries underground. Set into the surface were gold inlays, a crescent moon, a full moon, and a scattering of stars. At first glance it looked like art, but as archaeologists studied it, they realized they were holding something far more extraordinary, perhaps the oldest known map of the heavens. Today we call it the Nebra Sky Disk, and it is something modern science struggles to fully replicate. Carbon dating of artifacts found near it suggests it was buried around 1600 BCE, but the disk itself may have been made centuries earlier. Imagine that, more than 3,600 years ago, someone crafted an image of the night sky precise enough to identify the Pleiades star cluster. This was not random decoration. This was knowledge made metal, astronomy hammered into bronze, the cosmos made permanent by human hands. The paradox is how such sophistication could exist at that time. According to conventional history, astronomy in Bronze Age Europe was limited to basic alignments, stone circles, solstice markers, horizon tracking. Yet here was a portable star chart, precise enough to help guide agricultural cycles and ritual calendars. The golden inlays are not symbolic doodles, they match actual celestial bodies. How could people without telescopes, without written language in much of the region, produce such accuracy? It is a riddle that humbles modern historians. Look closer at the disk's design. The crescent moon and the full moon are unmistakable. Next to them are 7 golden dots, perfectly arranged as the Pleiades, a cluster revered in cultures across the world. In ancient times, the rising and setting of the Pleiades marked the sowing and harvesting of crops. Whoever made the disk knew this connection. They were not merely stargazing for beauty, they were embedding cosmic rhythms into a tool for survival. At the edges of the disk are golden arcs, thought to mark the angle of the sun's path at solstices. Another edition, possibly later, shows a solar boat, echoing myths of the sun sailing across the sky. This was not just a chart, it was a worldview, a cosmology pressed into bronze. Replicating it today poses unexpected challenges. We can copy the metal, the patina, the gold, but we cannot replicate the worldview that created it. For us, the sky is data, measured in coordinates, calculated by algorithms. For the makers of the Nebra disk, the sky was a living rhythm, a pulse of time woven into the cycles of earth and seed. To recreate it as they did would mean relearning how to watch the stars, not through telescopes, but through patience, through generations of careful eyes, noting when constellations rose and fell. It would mean turning the entire sky into a calendar without a single written word. The disk also raises questions about forgotten networks of knowledge. Bronze itself required trade. Tin and copper mined from different regions and smelted together. Gold came from distant rivers. The craftsmanship implies not an isolated tribe, but a culture linked by trade and ideas. Who shared this knowledge? Was there a class of sky watchers, ancient astronomer priests, who tracked the heavens and taught their communities how to live by them? If so, their lineage vanished, leaving only this one object as a whisper. When you picture it lying under the soil for millennia, it feels almost like fate that it returned to light. Imagine standing in that German forest as the hunters pulled it from the dirt. Sunlight touched the gold again after 3,600 years. The stars gleamed faintly, a lost map, blinking awake. To hold it is to feel the weight of time. It is not just metal, it is human thought, preserved against the odds. The Nebra disk also unsettles our sense of progress. We like to believe astronomy advanced in a straight line from Stone Age curiosity to Greek geometry to modern telescopes. But this artifact suggests peaks and valleys, flashes of brilliance lost for centuries. Its makers understood something crucial about the heavens, something sophisticated enough to encode into gold. That knowledge was later forgotten, buried with them, only to resurface thousands of years later. Progress, then, is not a staircase but a spiral. Knowledge can rise, fall, and vanish. For sleep, this paradox works like a lullaby. Imagine lying on your back in a Bronze Age field, stars scattered above, the Pleiades twinkling like a tiny cluster of fireflies. Around you, the air smells of smoke and earth. Your people have watched the sky for generations, memorized its changes, trusted it to guide planting and harvest. One night, someone decides to fix this knowledge in metal. The hammer strikes, gold is pressed into bronze, and suddenly the infinite is held in your hands. You close your eyes, knowing that the stars will keep their promise, and the disk will keep the memory. Today, scientists still debate its meaning. Was it a calendar, a ritual object, a teaching tool? Perhaps it was all three. Yet its precision defies simple categorization. No single experiment in our age can explain how such an object came to exist so early, so suddenly, in a landscape we thought primitive. And so the Nebra Sky Disk remains like the stars themselves, visible, knowable, but never fully within reach. To replicate it now would mean more than copying gold onto bronze. It would mean relearning how to see, how to live by the slow dance of constellations, how to trust the night sky as both map and guide. That is what we have lost. The disk does not only show us stars, it shows us ourselves and the gap between what we once knew and what we have forgotten. It is an artifact that is both a chart of the heavens and a mirror of human limitation. In its golden dots and arcs, we glimpse a people who could weave the cosmos into their survival, and in our struggle to understand it, we glimpse our own distance from that way of seeing. The stars still shine as they did, the Pleiades still rise and fall, but the meaning they carried has slipped away. The Nebra Sky Disk is proof that some knowledge cannot be replicated, it can only be remembered. When travelers today visit Petra, the ancient stone city carved into rose-red cliffs of Jordan, they marvel at the facades, temples, tombs, and columns rising from sheer canyon walls. But what truly kept Petra alive was not its beauty, but its water. For Petra lay in one of the driest deserts in the world, a land where summer heat withers and rainfall is rare. Yet thousands of people lived there, flourished there, for centuries. Their survival depended on a system of water management so advanced, so intricate, that even now engineers struggle to understand and replicate it. The Petra water system is one of humanity's great mysteries, an invisible architecture as important as the carved monuments themselves. Imagine the desert around Petra, arid mountains, flash floods rushing unpredictably, long months of dust and heat. To live here required more than storing rainwater. It required mastery. The Nabateans, the ancient people who built Petra around the 4th century BCE, studied the landscape with uncanny precision. They cut channels into cliffs, laid ceramic pipelines, built dams, cisterns, and reservoirs, and somehow tamed both scarcity and abundance. Rainfall was caught, floods were diverted, underground tanks were filled, and water flowed where it was needed. Fountains, houses, gardens. The paradox is how such knowledge appeared in a culture we label desert nomads. These people were traders, caravan masters, yet they designed hydrological systems rivaling anything Rome ever built. A city without rivers became an oasis. At its height, Petra may have held 20,000 inhabitants. Without water management, it would have been impossible. With it, Petra became not just habitable but radiant. Gardens grew, public baths steamed, streets had running fountains. In the heart of the desert, they created abundance. One secret lay in their use of gravity. They chiseled narrow channels along cliff faces, gently sloping so water would flow smoothly without losing pressure. These channels were often covered with stone slabs, protecting against evaporation and contamination. At turns, settling basins caught sand and debris, filtering water before it reached homes. Ceramic pipes fitted so tightly they could still hold water today. When floods roared through the canyons, dams and diversion walls redirected torrents into safe channels, storing them for later. What looks like simple rock to us was, in fact, a living infrastructure, a web of veins pulsing with water. Modern engineers admire but also puzzle. Yes, we can copy channels, cisterns, pipelines, but we cannot replicate the Nabatean genius for adaptation. They worked with the land, shaping their system to fit terrain, rainfall, and stone. It wasn't a universal blueprint, but a living dialogue with their desert. To reproduce it today would mean not just building pipes but relearning how to read landscapes the way they did, patiently, intimately, through centuries of watching storms, tracing flows, mapping every fault in the rock. And the results went beyond survival. Petra's water system became an engine of trade. Caravans crossing Arabia knew that Petra offered not only shelter but refreshment. Animals could drink, travelers could wash, gardens could flourish. Wealth poured in, and the Nabateans became rich. Water, invisible and silent, was Petra's true treasure. Without it, the carved facades would have been meaningless, abandoned within a generation. With it, Petra thrived for centuries, until shifts in trade routes and politics left it to fade back into stone. Think of the skill it took to hide water in the desert. Cisterns cut deep into rock, their entrances disguised, pipes hidden beneath flagstones, reservoirs camouflaged behind walls. This was not only engineering but strategy, for in a desert world water was power. To control it was to rule. And so Petra's rulers made sure their system was as secretive as it was efficient. Even today, archaeologists uncover new channels, hidden tanks, forgotten conduits. The city continues to whisper secrets of how it survived. For sleep, this story works like a dream of flowing streams in a dry land. Imagine walking through Petra's narrow sick, the canyon path twisting between towering cliffs. You hear nothing but your footsteps, and the faint whisper of wind. Then, as you touch the stone walls, you notice grooves cut into the rock, ancient water channels, running silent and patient. In your mind, you follow them, imagining cool water slipping past feeding gardens hidden in the desert. You close your eyes and feel the paradox, abundance in scarcity, life where none should exist. Why can't we replicate it now? In theory, we can design dams, channels, filters, pipelines far larger and stronger. But what we struggle to capture is balance. Modern systems often overreach, draining aquifers, building unsustainable megaprojects. Petra's system was small, precise, and endlessly adapted to its environment. It thrived for centuries without collapse, because it worked with nature, not against it. To replicate it today would mean abandoning our obsession with control and returning to humility, watching the land, listening to rain, building only what is needed. The Petra water system stands as proof that ancient people could solve problems we still struggle with. Climate change and drought threaten modern cities, yet a vanished desert culture built resilience long before. Their technology is lost not because we lack tools, but because we lack their way of seeing. They turned scarcity into art, and in their silence, carved into rock, lies a reminder. Water is not just a resource, it is life, memory, and survival itself. When you drift to sleep, imagine lying beneath Petra's cliffs, hearing water trickle through channels carved 2,000 years ago. Imagine closing your eyes, the desert heat fading, replaced by the sound of flowing streams. The Nabateans built more than a city. They built a dream of water in stone, and that dream, still echoing through time, is one we cannot quite bring back. In a cathedral in Turin, Italy, rests a length of linen that has stirred debate for centuries. Faintly imprinted on its surface is the ghostly image of a man, front and back, head to toe. Some say it is the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. Others insist it is a medieval forgery. Yet no matter how often it is tested, no matter how many theories are proposed, the Turin shroud resists explanation. Its mystery lies not only in its possible origin, but in the technology, or lack of technology, that created its haunting image. To this day, no one can reproduce it with the same qualities. Look closely at the shroud, and you see something uncanny. The image is not painted, not drawn, not stitched. It is as if the fibers themselves carry a shadow, an imprint without pigment. Under microscopes, scientists find no brushstrokes, no dyes penetrating deep. The coloration rests only on the very surface of the linen fibers, thinner than a hair, as though the fabric were briefly kissed by light. How could such an effect be created in the Middle Ages, centuries before photography, lasers, or radiation imaging? Some theories suggest scorching, as if heat or flame might have singed the fibers into a pattern, but controlled experiments show fire burns too deep, spreads unevenly, and cannot reproduce the delicacy of the shroud's image. Others propose an early chemical technique, using pigments or powders transferred onto cloth. Yet such methods leave residues, stains, binders, materials, none of which appear in the shroud's threads. More recent theories lean toward radiation, bursts of ultraviolet light, or even quantum-level phenomena. But these require technologies far beyond both the medieval world and, in practical terms, even our own laboratories. For believers, the image is miraculous, a divine flash of energy at the moment of resurrection, burned into cloth as a testimony. For skeptics, the shroud is a brilliant fraud, so clever that it continues to outwit modern science. Yet both agree the exact method remains elusive. Replicas fall short. No experiment has managed to recreate every feature. The superficial fiber staining, the negative-like imaging quality, the three-dimensional data encoded within the cloth. Yes, three-dimensional when scanned digitally, the shroud's image reveals topographic information, as if the intensity of the shading corresponds to distances between body and fabric. This is not something a painter could casually achieve with medieval brushes and pigments. History only deepens the mystery. The shroud first appeared in records in the 14th century in France, linked to a knight and a local church. Critics point to this late appearance, centuries after Christ, as proof of forgery. Yet others argue it may have existed earlier, hidden in private collections moved in secret during times of war and iconoclasm. When carbon dating tests were carried out in 1988, samples suggested a medieval origin between 1260 and 1390. But subsequent studies challenged these results, arguing that the samples came from a repaired portion of the cloth, contaminated by centuries of handling, fire damage and restorations. The debate remains unresolved. What makes the shroud so compelling is not only its possible link to Jesus, but the sheer strangeness of the image. Imagine lying a body on cloth. You would expect stains, distortions, smears. Instead, the shroud's figure is sharp, proportional, front and back aligned with precision. Bloodstains, yes, real human blood has been detected, but the image itself has no thickness, no penetration, just surface-level impressions. It is as if a photographic negative were made before photography. In fact, when first photographed in 1898, the glass negative revealed details invisible to the naked eye. The faint imprint of the face became striking, lifelike, haunting. To fall asleep with this story is to drift into the paradox of presence and absence. Imagine standing before the cloth, dimly lit, the faint outline of a face gazing back at you across centuries. You feel both intimacy and distance. Here is a man's image, but not a man, a shadow without substance. The closer you look, the less it explains itself. The further you step back, the clearer the figure becomes, like a dream resolving only when you stop trying to see it. It is both there and not there, a paradox in linen. And this is what science cannot replicate, not merely the fibers but the paradox itself. For every attempt to reproduce the image falls into one of two traps. Either it looks convincing, but leaves physical residues and brushstrokes that the original lacks, or it mimics the superficial fiber effect but fails to capture the haunting realism of the face and body. The Turin shroud seems to demand both artistry and physics, both spiritual imagination and technical mastery, fused into something we cannot quite hold. Perhaps that is the point. The shroud may be less about what it proves, and more about what it unsettles. If it is a forgery, it is one of the most brilliant in history, crafted with techniques unknown even today. If it is authentic, then it records an event outside natural law. In either case, it humbles us. For in our age of technology, with satellites mapping the stars and AI generating images, a piece of medieval linen still sits beyond our reach, reminding us of limits. As you drift further into sleep, imagine the cloth folded away in darkness, its fibers carrying an imprint older than memory. Imagine touching it lightly, feeling nothing unusual under your fingers, yet knowing that within those threads lies a puzzle unsolved. It is a paradox woven into fabric, an image we cannot replicate, a shadow we cannot dismiss, a silence we cannot explain. Far above the clouds of the Andes, an empire once stretched across mountains, valleys, and deserts. The Inca ruled vast territories without iron, without wheels, without writing, at least not writing as we know it. Yet somehow they governed millions, collected taxes, stored knowledge, and transmitted messages across thousands of miles. Their secret tool was the quipu cords, knotted in patterns so intricate that they may hold an entire lost language. To this day, scholars cannot fully decipher them. The Inca spoke with string, and modern science still struggles to understand what those knots truly say. At first glance, a quipu looks simple, colored cords hanging from a main rope, knotted at intervals, dangling like strands of hair. But closer inspection reveals something remarkable. The cords vary in thickness, length, twist, color, and position. The knots themselves come in different styles, single, long, figure eight, tied at precise intervals. Each of these variables carries meaning. To the untrained eye, they are just tangles. To an Inca administrator, they were a living archive. With quipus, the empire tracked harvests, counted tribute, recorded population numbers, and perhaps told stories we can no longer read. For centuries, the Western world dismissed quipus as primitive calculators, tools for tallying crops and census data. Numbers, yes, but not words. Yet recent discoveries challenge this view. Some quipus show patterns too complex for mere accounting. Chord colors may represent clans or places. Knot arrangements may encode phonetic elements. Scholars now suspect that quipus formed a full narrative system, a fiber language knotted into being. If true, then thousands of quipus scattered across museums are not mute relics, but books waiting to be read. Imagine entire histories dangling silently, their voices trapped in twisted chords. The beauty of the quipu lies not only in its possible content, but in its method. Unlike paper, which can burn or decay, quipus were portable, durable, and resistant to time. They could be carried across mountains by chasqui runners, the messengers of the empire, who relayed information faster than many medieval postal systems. With quipus, the Incas built one of the most efficient communication networks of the pre-modern world. They stitched order into chaos, knotting their empire together with thread. Yet today, we cannot replicate this system. We can tie knots, yes, and assign them values, but the full grammar eludes us. It is as though someone handed us a hard drive without the password. We can see the data encoded, recognize its structure, but cannot access the meaning. Quipu studies are ongoing, with computer models comparing known samples, but progress is slow. Each chord remains a riddle, whispering in a language beyond translation. This failure humbles us. We live in an age of information, with data flowing at light speed, stored in silicon chips, encrypted across servers. Yet we cannot crack chords tied by hand centuries ago. The Inca remind us that technology is not always about machinery, but about imagination. They found literacy not in ink, but in fiber. They built archives not in books, but in woven patterns. Their system was alien to us, yet perfectly suited to their world. The destruction of Inca knowledge deepens the mystery. When Spanish conquerors arrived, they dismissed quipus as pagan tools. Thousands were destroyed. What survives are fragments, scattered and incomplete. Imagine a future where only scraps of our books remain. Torn chapters of novels, single pages of ledgers. That is what we have of the Inca library. Fragments of a woven tongue. We can guess, but we cannot hear their full voice. Perhaps, hidden in lost quipus, are myths, poems, genealogies, even philosophical reflections. We may never know. And so, the quipu stands as a paradox of presence and absence. The chords remain, but the meaning is gone. The technology is in our hands, but the knowledge to use it is lost. We can replicate the object but not the system. It is a ghost of communication, as if language itself had turned to shadow. This paradox unsettles modern confidence. We assume progress builds upon progress, that nothing of value is ever truly lost. Yet here is proof, a whole form of writing, invisible to us, once flourished and is now silent. As you drift into sleep, picture a quippo hanging in darkness, chords swaying like strands of memory. Each knot is a heartbeat, each color a whisper. Together they form a map of meaning, but one that only the dead can read. The quippo hums with silence, reminding you that some knowledge is not gone but hidden. It waits, patient, beyond our reach, daring us to untie its code. In the knots of string, the Inca wove a secret we still cannot unravel. Perhaps, in another dream, you could run your fingers along those chords and feel the language pulse back to life. You could hear the voices of messengers, the laughter of farmers, the commands of rulers, all woven into fiber. But tonight, you will not solve it. Tonight, you rest among mysteries, lulled by the thought that not all languages are spoken, not all stories are written, and not all technologies can be remade. Some remain tied forever, knotted into silence. In the highlands of central Mexico lies a city so vast, so carefully aligned, and so enigmatically constructed, that it still unsettles historians. Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. Long before the Aztecs discovered it in ruins, this city thrived with avenues wider than Rome's, pyramids taller than many medieval cathedrals, and hidden networks of tunnels beneath its surface. Yet no one truly knows who built it, how they built it, or what precise knowledge guided their design. Teotihuacan is not just a ruin, it is a puzzle frozen in stone, daring us to understand its lost technology. The city stretches over 20 square kilometers, with the Avenue of the Dead forming its central spine. On either side rise monumental structures, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. From above, their placement is not random but geometric, echoing celestial patterns. The Pyramid of the Sun, in particular, aligns with astronomical events like the setting sun on specific days. This precision suggests that the builders possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy, surveying, and engineering. How did a civilization, without modern tools, create such cosmic order? Beneath the ground, the mystery deepens. Archaeologists discovered hidden tunnels under the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, lined with liquid mercury, and sprinkled with pyrite that sparkled like stars. Some believe these were symbolic underworlds, reflecting the cosmos in miniature. Others suggest they had ritual or technological purposes we cannot comprehend. Liquid mercury is toxic, difficult to obtain, and requires heating to extract. How did ancient builders source it in such quantities? Why did they use it? These questions hang unanswered, shimmering like the mirrored walls themselves. The construction techniques also bewilder us. Millions of tons of stone were cut, transported, and stacked without the wheel, without beasts of burden, without iron tools. Walls were coated with a smooth plaster that once gleamed white, reflecting sunlight across the city. Colors, red, yellow, green, blue, adorned murals, many still vibrant after centuries. The scale of organization required to build and maintain such a metropolis suggests a mastery of logistics that rivals our own. Yet we do not know who led it, what system governed it, or why it eventually collapsed. Modern technology has revealed even stranger details. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar suggest the city was laid out according to a grid that mirrors the movements of stars, particularly the Pleiades and Orion. Ratios within its design echo those found in other ancient structures across the globe, hinting at universal mathematical constants. Some researchers claim that Teotihuacan encodes measurements of the Earth itself, its circumference, its calendar cycles, its relation to celestial bodies. If true, the city is not merely a home for people, but a machine for time and space, a cosmic calculator built of stone. Yet despite all our tools, lasers, drones, 3D modeling, we cannot reconstruct the full blueprint. The hidden logic of Teotihuacan remains elusive. We can map its stones, measure its alignments, trace its murals, but the purpose slips away. It is as if the city itself is a text written in a lost language, one we can admire but not translate. The builders are gone, their names erased, their intentions swallowed by centuries. What survives is the echo of knowledge beyond our grasp. The Aztecs who encountered Teotihuacan long after it was abandoned, revered it as sacred. They believed gods had walked there, shaping the cosmos. Perhaps they sensed what we also feel, that the city was not just human but transcendent in its ambition. It stands as a reminder that civilizations rise and vanish, leaving behind monuments that defy replication. Even with cranes, bulldozers and computers, we would struggle to rebuild Teotihuacan with the precision, symbolism and sheer scale that its anonymous architects achieved. Consider the paradox. We fly into space, send probes to other planets, split atoms, and yet cannot fully replicate a city built with stone tools and human hands. Progress, it seems, is not linear. Knowledge can be gained and lost, flowing like a tide. Teotihuacan is one of those lost waves, a surge of brilliance receding into silence. The stones remain, but the mind that shaped them is gone. As you drift deeper into rest, picture yourself walking the Avenue of the Dead at dusk. The pyramids loom on either side, casting long shadows. Above, the stars align with uncanny precision, as if the city itself is breathing with the cosmos. You feel small, as the builders must have felt, caught between earth and sky, weaving order out of mystery. Each step echoes with questions we cannot answer. Each shadow whispers that not all knowledge endures. In this place, sleep becomes a form of travel. You close your eyes and see the tunnels of Mercury, shimmering like rivers of stars beneath the earth. You see walls painted with gods whose names are forgotten. You see a city that is more than a city, a machine, a ritual, a song in stone. You feel its silence, heavier than any answer, pressing against you like the weight of the pyramids. And as you fall asleep, Teotihuacan follows, a city alive in your dreams, forever asking, how much do we truly know? In the green plains of Japan, enormous mounds rise from the earth, shaped like keyholes when seen from above. These are the Kofun tombs, built between the 3rd and 7th centuries, burial places for rulers and elites of ancient Japan. To the casual eye, they might look like hills, covered in trees and grass, but their design, their size, and the secrets buried within, make them one of the greatest mysteries of ancient engineering, a technology of memory and authority that we still cannot fully replicate, nor even fully understand. The largest of them all, the Daisenrai Kofun in Osaka, is attributed to Emperor Nintoku. It stretches nearly 500 meters in length, surrounded by 3 moats, larger in area than the Great Pyramid of Giza. From the ground, it feels like a landscape. From the sky, it is an unmistakable keyhole, precise in its form, massive in its scale. Without drones or aircraft, how could the builders have ensured such symmetry? The labor force needed would have numbered in the tens of thousands, coordinated with astonishing precision. Yet there are no written records to explain how this was achieved. Inside, the tombs are even stranger. Archaeologists who have explored smaller Kofun discovered burial chambers made of massive stones, intricately placed, sometimes containing bronze mirrors, iron weapons, armor, and jewelry. These objects, finely crafted, hint at advanced metallurgy and artistry, but the largest tombs remain untouched, sealed not by time but by decree. The Japanese Imperial Household Agency forbids excavation of the biggest Kofun, claiming they are sacred resting places of ancestors. This restriction means that the greatest secrets of the Kofun, the full scope of their construction methods, the technology they conceal, even the remains within, are locked away from human knowledge. The question of alignment deepens the mystery. Many Kofun are oriented in ways that suggest astronomical significance. Some align with the rising sun on solstices, others with surrounding mountains or rivers, as if integrating natural and cosmic order into their design. This required not only engineering skill but also astronomical observation, surveying techniques, and a philosophy that saw land and sky as inseparable. In other words, they are not simply tombs, they are cosmic diagrams, maps of belief carved into the earth. Modern attempts to reconstruct how they were built only deepen our respect. Moving millions of tons of soil without machines would require unimaginable human effort. Shaping them into keyhole forms, with precise proportions and multiple encircling moats, suggests a command of geometry and hydrology far beyond what we expect of the period. Even the moats themselves seem symbolic as well as practical, separating the tomb from the world of the living, reflecting the sky on their waters like mirrors of eternity. The paradox is stark in our age. We can build skyscrapers that scrape the sky, tunnels under oceans, and rockets into space. But we do not build tombs like this. We do not shape entire landscapes into symbols of power and eternity, with the same blend of scale, geometry, and mystery. To replicate the Dazen Kofun today would cost billions, demand vast resources, and perhaps still fail to capture the hidden philosophy encoded in its design. Some scholars speculate that the Kofun mark Japan's transition into statehood, that they are not merely burials but technologies of unification. By mobilizing entire populations to build monuments for rulers, society learned hierarchy, coordination, and the weight of centralized power. In this sense, the tombs are not just engineering marvels but instruments of social engineering, shaping the living as much as honoring the dead. Yet this theory only adds another layer to the puzzle. How did leaders command such obedience, and what knowledge guided their choices of form and alignment? From above, the keyhole shape itself beckons with metaphor. A keyhole is an entrance, a mystery, a symbol of something locked away. The Kofun are precisely that. Keys to a past we cannot open. Each time archaeologists petition to excavate the largest tombs, they are denied. The silence of the imperial household agency becomes part of the enigma, preserving secrets as carefully as the builders once did. We know enough to be astonished, but not enough to be certain. As night deepens and your thoughts grow slower, picture yourself walking the perimeter of such a tomb. The moat glimmers in moonlight, frogs croak in the reeds, and the mound rises before you like a sleeping giant. You cannot see its full shape from where you stand. Only the stars above seem to outline it in your imagination. You feel both awe and unease, sensing the weight of lives long gone, the silence of a technology lost, the permanence of stone and soil shaped by invisible hands. In the dream of sleep, you rise above. You see the keyhole shape revealed, precise against the patchwork of fields and rivers. You see the moats glint like rings of silver. You see how many there are, scattered across Japan, each a puzzle, each a locked chamber of history, and you realize that progress is not measured only by what we can build, but also by what we can no longer build. The Kofun stand as quiet proof that the past contains technologies of mystery, memory, and meaning that our present cannot replicate. And so, as you drift further into rest, the mound becomes both tomb and keyhole for your own thoughts, a passage into dreams, where ancient designs still breathe, and where silence is more powerful than answers. In the shifting shadows of ancient kingdoms, where daggers gleamed as brightly as crowns, poison was a constant invisible weapon, and no one understood its power better than Mithridates VI of Pontus, a king whose very name became entwined with the science of toxins. Living in the 1st century BCE, he ruled a kingdom along the Black Sea and stood against Rome itself. But his most lasting legacy is not his wars, but his obsession mastering poisons so completely that they could no longer harm him. It is a story of fear, genius, and paradox, an ancient technology of biology that we still cannot fully replicate. Mithridates grew up in a court soaked in betrayal. His own father had been poisoned, and his mother plotted against him. In such an environment, paranoia was not weakness, but survival. The young prince began experimenting with small doses of toxins, ingesting minute amounts of deadly plants and minerals. Slowly, carefully, he trained his body to endure what would kill another. This practice, later called Mithridatism, became his shield. According to legend, he was so resistant to poison that when he finally sought death by drinking it, it had no effect. His enemies had to kill him by the sword. But this is more than a story of superstition. Ancient sources describe Mithridates compiling complex antidotes, formulas mixing dozens of ingredients, from opium to honey, from exotic herbs to crushed minerals. His universal antidote, sometimes referred to as the Mithridatium, was said to protect against nearly all known poisons. Roman physicians later adopted and modified it, with versions surviving for centuries as the theriac, a panacea believed to guard against death itself. Imagine the technology hidden in such mixtures, not random superstition, but knowledge born from careful trial, error and record-keeping across years of experimentation. What makes this a technology we cannot replicate is not only the formula itself, which has been lost in layers of history, but the mindset behind it. To create an antidote against the most subtle and deadly agents of nature required observing how tiny doses affected the body, balancing substances that in combination could either kill or heal. Even with modern pharmacology, we struggle to map such complexity. We design drugs to target specific illnesses, but Mithridates pursued something broader, a dynamic shield against the unknown, a biochemical armor. That ambition still eludes us. The paradox deepens when you think of resistance. Today, science confirms the principle of Mithridatism. Exposure to small, non-lethal doses can build immunity. We use this logic in vaccines, training the body to recognize enemies before they attack. Yet no one alive is known to have mastered poisons as Mithridates supposedly did. Cyanide, arsenic, hemlock, the list of toxins that act too swiftly or with too much destructive power defies any attempt at resistance. His story leaves us in doubt. Did he truly achieve the impossible, or has myth exaggerated his success? But myths often preserve fragments of reality, magnified like reflections in dark water. The universal antidote remains one of the greatest missing technologies of antiquity. Recipes survive in scattered texts, but they differ wildly, and their preparation required ingredients long extinct or impossible to identify. Some versions contained dozens of components, others more than 60. To replicate such a medicine would be like recreating a symphony from half-remembered notes. Even if we assembled the ingredients, the knowledge of proportion, timing, and preparation has vanished. It was not simply chemistry, it was ritual, philosophy, and survival combined. Imagine the scene: Mithridates in his chambers, scrolls spread across a table, assistants grinding herbs, powders measured with precision, liquids distilled in clay vessels. Outside, whispers of assassination echo in the court. Inside, the king swallows what others would fear to touch. Each dose is a step deeper into mastery. To him, poison was not just danger, but data, a language of the body he sought to read. This fusion of ruler and scientist feels almost alien to us, as though he were both alchemist and king. Rome feared him not only for his armies, but for his invulnerability. What use was poison, the most discreet weapon, against a man who could not be poisoned? His mastery turned one of the deadliest tools of antiquity into a blunt instrument, useless against him. That in itself was technology, turning weakness into strength, turning fear into immunity. Today, we speak of cybersecurity, vaccines, or nuclear deterrence in similar terms. Mithridates embodied that same principle in flesh and blood. And yet, for all his success, his end was still tragic. When Rome finally defeated him, Mithridates attempted suicide by poison, but according to the legend, his own body betrayed him, or rather it was too loyal to his long training. The poison failed, and he had to ask a soldier to end his life with steel. In that moment lies the cruelest paradox of his art. The shield he forged also denied him escape. His victory over death became the very thing that bound him to it. Tonight, as you let your mind drift, you might picture this strange king standing at the crossroads of science and myth. He is both a ruler of men and a prisoner of his own experiments, both immune and vulnerable, both scientist and subject. His mastery of poisons is more than a curiosity of history. It is a reminder that knowledge can protect and imprison at once. The mastery of Mithridates is a technology not of stone or metal, but of flesh and adaptation, one we cannot rebuild because it was lived, not written. It was knowledge carved into his own body, a laboratory of blood and bone that died with him, and so it lingers as mystery, proof that sometimes the greatest technologies are not machines but transformations of the human being itself. Along the banks of the Indus River, long before Rome rose and Egypt's monuments towered, there thrived a civilization so meticulous and enigmatic that its very ruins whisper secrets through time. Mohenjo-Daro, one of the largest cities of the Indus Valley civilization, built around 2500 BCE, is a testament to human ingenuity that feels impossibly modern. Its streets were laid out in perfect grids, houses aligned with astonishing precision, drainage systems that rival today's engineering, and bricks so uniform that they almost seem to have been mass-produced with a machine. To walk through the remnants is to step into a world where planning, foresight, and urban mastery were not dreams but everyday practice. Archaeologists who uncovered the city were stunned. The bricks, baked uniformly, standardized in size, and crafted from river clay, suggested not only knowledge of materials, but also rigorous social organization. For a city of tens of thousands, this consistency implies centralized planning, or at least a shared system of measurement, so precise that chaos never touched construction. Streets intersect at exact right angles, residential blocks are methodically arranged, public buildings and granaries indicate civic awareness beyond mere survival. Even the world's first known public baths, the Great Bath, reveals an understanding of water control, waterproofing, and ritual function. It is urban design as art and technology intertwined. But what truly fascinates engineers today is Mohenjo-Daro's drainage system. Every house, from modest dwellings to grand residences, had access to covered drains, connected seamlessly to a network that carried waste and rainwater away efficiently. The flow suggests calculations of gradient, volume, and maintenance. It is not primitive improvisation, but but deliberate, logical, and enduring design. These were not just functional conveniences, they were demonstrations of societal sophistication, an understanding that health, sanitation, and urban order could be engineered. Every line of bricks, every channel, every brick joint speaks of a civilization that treated precision as sacred. Mohenjo-Daro also displays an engineering paradox. It is highly advanced, yet the methods remain invisible to us. There are no monumental inscriptions detailing the builders' knowledge. No texts survived that tell us how they achieved such uniformity, how they organized labor, or how they maintained quality across the entire city. Modern engineers can replicate bricks, measure grids, and analyze drainage slopes, but the true processes of coordination, measurement, and project management vanish in the sands of time. This leaves us marveling not only at their results, but at the lost techniques, the knowledge that existed as practice, not records. The city's water management extends to wells found in almost every home. Each well lined with uniform bricks ensured clean drinking water, a rarity in the ancient world. Some wells were as deep as 20 feet, providing access to groundwater even during dry seasons. The careful placement of wells, the interconnection with drainage, and the use of waterproof mortars all indicate that Mohenjo-Daro's engineers understood hydrodynamics at an intuitive, empirical level. They were not theorists but meticulous observers, translating experience into infrastructure that lasted millennia. Archaeologists also highlight the uniformity of Mohenjo-Daro's weights and measures. Standardized weights, carved with geometric precision, suggest a sophisticated economic system capable of complex trade, taxation, and regulation. When paired with urban planning and water engineering, it paints a picture of a civilization that balanced technical mastery, social order, and economic foresight in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. The city is a blueprint for civilization itself, a silent testament that human creativity can flourish in harmony with practical necessity. And yet, Mohenjo-Daro vanished. Unlike Rome or Egypt, there is no definitive record of conquest or collapse. Its secrets are buried under silt, leaving us to reconstruct, infer, and imagine. We can replicate its bricks and channels in labs, but the intuition, the shared cultural discipline, the organizational knowledge that enabled an entire city to function with such seamless precision, the technology, encoded in human behavior and society, is lost. Mohenjo-Daro challenges our understanding of innovation. It was not merely mechanical but social, a technology of civilization itself. As you drift further into the rhythm of thought, picture yourself walking its empty streets. Feel the cool stone underfoot. Hear the faint echo of water in distant drains. Notice the perfect alignment of walls stretching away, shadows of a civilization that moved with astonishing coordination. Each corner, each intersection, each precise brick tells a story not of raw power or conquest, but of order, foresight, and the beauty of structure. Its legacy is not monuments, gold, or inscriptions. It is the silent perfection of design in everyday life, a dream of human intelligence crystallized in clay. Mohenjo-Daro remains one of history's greatest enigmas. It is a city without kings in the record, without stories of battles or kings' names engraved in stone, yet its mastery speaks louder than any conquest. Its engineers transformed clay, water, and labor into a society that thrived for centuries, leaving a blueprint we can marvel at but cannot fully reproduce. In that silent precision lies a truth. Technology is not only steel, fire, or circuitry. It can be order, planning, and human ingenuity, woven so tightly into life that it seems invisible yet endures long after its makers have vanished. And so, as night deepens, let the streets of Mohenjo-Daro guide your mind into quiet wonder. Think of the invisible hands that shaped its bricks, the careful minds that plotted its water, the shared discipline that orchestrated thousands of lives. It is a civilization that whispers through time, teaching that true engineering is as much about coordination, foresight, and social harmony as it is about materials. Mohenjo-Daro remains a ghost of mastery, a civilization whose technology survives in silence, precision, and awe. There is a hypnotic rhythm in this collection of mysteries, a recurring cadence in the cadence of stone, metal, water, and fire. Colossus of Rhodes stands as a monument to ambition, yet it falls into memory, reminding us that grandeur is fragile. The Baghdad battery debates hum with possibility, suggesting that knowledge can exist unrecorded yet potent. The Lycurgus Cup's dancing colors and the Nazca line's geometrical perfection challenge our perception of materials and space, bending reality into a canvas of ingenuity. Each creation was a dialogue with the universe, a conversation between human limitation and the drive to surpass it. As the shadows of the past stretch across millennia, a pattern emerges, an intricate lattice of human ingenuity, persistence and mystery that refuses to fade completely. From the precise angles of the Great Pyramid to the unyielding strength of Mohenjo-Daro's bricks, each ancient marvel is a silent testament to minds that thought, calculated, and dreamed far beyond their time. These wonders were not created for display alone. They were experiments in existence, challenges to understanding, and invitations to wonder. When you trace the lines of Roman concrete, feel the layers of Damascus steel, or imagine the gears of the Antikythera mechanism turning silently in the sun, you begin to perceive a civilization of thinkers, makers, and planners whose intelligence resonates even in absence. We see ingenuity repeated across continents and eras, a pulse that refuses to be erased. The Inca quippers whisper secrets in knots, while the Olmec heads gaze silently from their plinths. Petra's water channels carry more than liquid. They channel the intellect of generations. Greek fire, the Roman Dodecahedron, the Shamir cutting tool, all are reminders that innovation often hides in plain sight, its mechanisms lost, yet its effects enduring. Every time we encounter these marvels, we are forced to reconcile what is known with what is unknowable, bridging history and imagination in a dance that never truly ends. Yet, beyond admiration, there is a deeper lesson, one that slips past casual awareness and settles quietly in the mind. These civilizations succeeded not solely through brute force, wealth, or luck, but through observation, experimentation, collaboration, and imagination. They remind us that the human mind, when disciplined, curious, and patient, can shape the world in ways that outlive empires and kings. Every mechanism, monolith, and mosaic is a signal through time, a testament to the quiet power of intellect applied with purpose. Even when the methods are lost, the results endure, proving that intention, precision, and creativity are forms of immortality. As you drift through these stories, a gentle realization emerges. The wonders of the past are mirrors reflecting our own potential. Mohenjo-Daro's careful grids echo in our desire for order. Greek fire's innovation resonates with our pursuit of mastery. The precision of Roman concrete whispers of perseverance. The inscrutability of the Voynich manuscript reminds us that some truths may remain elusive, yet the curiosity they ignite is eternal. In every lost technique, broken artifact, and silent ruin, there exists an invitation to observe, imagine, and participate in a continuum of discovery that spans human history. It is here, in this tension, that the paradox of human achievement becomes clear. Civilizations can build structures that defy time, yet vanish without a trace of instruction or explanation. Baalbek's stone monoliths defy our lifting equipment. The Parthian energy devices elude replication. Ajanta cave temples conceal their acoustics. The coral castle still inspires awe without revealing its method. Knowledge, then, is both immortal and ephemeral, encoded in creation, yet hidden from understanding. This duality mirrors the human mind itself, capable of vast comprehension, yet frequently blind to the mechanisms by which understanding occurs. And so, as your mind drifts through these echoes, you become part of the continuum, a witness to ingenuity, a participant in wonder. Each section you explored, from the towering Colossus to the silent Quipu, weaves a subtle thread connecting your consciousness to the long line of thinkers and builders who came before. Their brilliance lingers not as instruction manuals or preserved texts, but as inspiration, as a rhythm in the bones of history that hums through imagination. Time becomes less a measure of years, and more a measure of connection, linking all who dare to think, to question, to create. Let this realization settle gently. What was built can outlast its builder, yet the spirit behind it is eternal. Even as empires crumble, as techniques vanish, and as monuments succumb to erosion, the pulse of human ingenuity persists. It vibrates in the stones, flows through water channels, resonates in metal, and turns in the hidden gears of devices we may never fully understand. These echoes are not just relics, they are reminders, calling quietly for reverence, reflection, and the recognition of our own capacity to imagine, build, and discover. In this quiet, immersive state, feel your thoughts expand and contract, moving like the gears of Antikythera, or the waves controlled in Petra's canals. Each marvel becomes a mental anchor, each enigma a gentle tug at curiosity. You are simultaneously observer and participant, floating through time, holding in your mind the precision of Mohenjo-Daro, the mystery of the Voynich manuscript, and the enduring resonance of human creativity. And as sleep deepens, you carry these echoes with you, letting the ingenuity of forgotten civilizations settle within the quiet corners of your consciousness. A subtle reminder that the human mind, even alone, is capable of wonders beyond measure.